Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto Kenjutsu Chunin exams part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. A cloaked man with an orange mask stood tall overlooking the war-torn battlefield before him. Scattered before him were the bodies of shinobi from all of the elemental nations. The grounds were scorched in every direction, some black flames still burning without fuel. He could see every single shinobi he had defeated in the battle before him. The Raikage, he was strong and fast. However, he was no match for the masked man who would simply allow the bulky man to phase right through him. The action would only prompt him to turn around and send a well-placed fireball right at the man while his back was turned. He had no time to react. He was obviously enraged by the fact that he had killed his brother earlier in the war, but the 8 tails had to be harvested. It was all for his master plan after all. Hatake Kakashi laid in a puddle off to the side. The silver-haired lazy jounin put up quite a fight, much to the masked man's surprise. Of course, the difference in skill between the two of them was drastic. He was able to put up quite a fight by normal standards. However, in the cloaked man's eyes, it was almost as if an insignificant little child came running at him with a chirping hand, hoping for the best. He did surprise him though with his Sharingan capabilities. Unluckily for him, it was nothing that the man hadn't foreseen. Madara took a deep breath of air and removed his mask for the first time in years. His timeless body had since lost any need for food or water. It was as if he was a god trapped in a human's body. He looked down with a scowl at the fallen blue-haired woman whom leaned up against the tree. Cone in her eyes were lifeless, but regardless of her situation, even in death she held a peaceful smile that almost seemed out of place on her mysterious features. She had since forsaken her Akatsuki cloak and betrayed him. Of course, he could rationalize that she was never his to begin with. Since Nagato's death, she had returned to AIM and locked the city down and went into hiding. She became the angel that took over AIM after the fall of their god. She had only come out after being asked by that insolent blonde. Madara grit his teeth as he thought about the blonde shinobi. There was no way that child would ever be able to compete with him. The boy had the audacity to call himself the man's equal. He had been ruining his plans ever since he came into this world. Starting first off with Uchiha Sasuke. People all thought their friendship was deep. Deeper than anything that the world had ever seen. Well, they thought wrong. The two fought each other to the death, and the blonde, after all of his growth as a shinobi, had come out on top again. He should have suspected as much though ever since what happened at the Valley of the End. He wanted to blame someone, and if anyone that used to oppose him were alive, I'm sure they would have had fun guessing. Perhaps it was the pink-haired girl, whom always beat the boy down. Her actions perhaps made the blonde stronger? Perhaps they taught him to never give up. That at the end of the road, through all of that adversity, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger? No, it wasn't her. Perhaps it was the former 5th Hokage. The closest thing the boy had to a mother in real life? The big sister-like figure that was always there for him, and would look out for him. The one he could go to in order to talk about anything. No, it wasn't her either. Perhaps it was the filthy white-haired pervert. The greatest of the legendary trio. The man whose sealing skills were only rivaled by one man. One man that was forever locked away, never to return to this world. The man that had taken the blonde on a trip and taught him how to live. Not for others, but for himself. He taught him about the Kyuubi's chakra. One of the key stepping stones towards becoming his equal, no attempting to become his equal. Yet it wasn't him. Was it the young blue-haired Hyuga? The first girl to ever admit her love for the boy. The one that would willingly jump in front of danger for the boy. The one whom always believed in him, and was always there for him. No. All of those people were the obvious choices, but they were all deceived. No, the one person was one that had already defied him before even meeting the boy. Had he known her reach had extended so far earlier, he would have dealt with her. For once in a long time, his eyes that could see everything, he was deceived. Mei Terumi, the 5th Mizukage. Who would have thought? Who would have thought something like that would have ever happened? She turned the boy into something that the world had never seen in decades. Ever since that fateful day they had crossed paths, had he known that the moment would turn the boy into his rival in ninjutsu, that she would turn into the sole factor in the boy's life that would forever make him a threat? That her presence alone could change everything? What she had done was so simple and yet so drastic. She gave the boy hope. Thus was why Madara could only look down and scowl at her fallen form. That, and the young man who had since come and crouched over her fallen form. It never had to come to this. The boy just had to surrender peacefully, and then a new era would have started. Uzumaki Naruto, the last Jinchuriki? Madara gave a pause as he got the boy's attention, seeing as how he looked to face the man, come to die. He asked as a tired voice. Naruto stood and looked up towards the man who had caused chaos and invoked terror across the shinobi nations. He reached into his shinobi pouch and pulled out a single scroll. This action caused Madara to narrow his eyes, and quickly launched several fireballs at the boy without the use of seals. His scowl could only deepen though as the boy's unique technique came to life, the one that made him revered as his equal. The ability to pull water out of this air. It blocked the fireballs with ease as they fizzled out against an equally large mass of water. Naruto tossed the scroll in mid-air as Madara spoke, "Boy, only I can live forever." Naruto appeared completely unfazed by the statement, and Madara asked the one question that had been forever plaguing his mind. "Why do you live?" he said in a condescending tone. Naruto looked up and for the first time since he arrived on the scene, thinking about all of the families and friends he had in the world, he knew his answer and it was obvious. Because I have something worth living for. The scroll unsealed. Naruto kicked a pebble repeatedly as he walked down the street. He had just asked his sensei, Kakashi, if he could train him for the upcoming Chunin exam. However, the man had declined. Much to Naruto's displeasure. He had told him that Sasuke was going to need all the help he could get against Gaara, and that he had already promised he would train Sasuke. This wouldn't have bothered Naruto much considering it was a promise. Naruto knew more than anyone how important it was to keep a promise. The problem was, he knew his sensei was lying. He at least tried to line up another sensei to take his place, which was thoughtful of him. That was until Naruto met the sensei that was supposed to train him. He had defeated the poor bastard with a jutsu designed for perverts. The man had literally passed out. Naruto couldn't rely on anyone that would pass out for hours at a time over a single jutsu that was designed for perverts. So here was his problem. Sure, Sasuke was going to have trouble with his fight against Gaara without a doubt. Yet Naruto was going to have trouble with his fight too. It wasn't like the Rookie of the Year Hyuga was going to be any easier. At least Sasuke had a few useful techniques under his belt that could possibly stand a chance against Gaara. There was no way for Naruto to even hope to beat Neji unless he was able to pull someone out of his ass. So when he arrived at his favorite training ground, and saw a woman in ragged dark blue clothing there walking on water, he was instantly mesmerized, and had already begun making his way over there. Naruto's situation in the village being the Kyuubi's vessel certainly did not make him the greatest candidate for the best dressed title. He owned very little, and the few things he did own were rather beat up. For example, his complete wardrobe consisted of 2 second-hand orange jumpsuits that have been stitched and patched up several times. Then naturally a couple pairs of underwear and a couple black shirts. That and some overalls that no longer fit him, but kept them for sentimental value. To be blunt, he looked homeless. Naruto sat down on a rock nearby the lake. The woman had since begun going through what appeared to be several different fluidly moving taijutsu stances. He could have swore he saw the water boil and bubble beneath her feet, but he didn't know for certain. He didn't even know if the woman had known of his arrival and the fact that he was watching her. The woman was young and slender, she couldn't be a day older than 25. She had ankle-length auburn hair with several bangs, one that continually covered her eye at all times. She had on dark blue nail polish and lipstick, which surprised Naruto slightly. It was an exotic look in his opinion, at least the color choices. Perhaps it was because of the area where his apartment was located. He was just used to all women wearing ruby red lipstick, high heels, and fishnet clothing with miniskirts. The proctor of the second part of the Chunin exam only solidified that opinion, since the only other female kunoichi he had seen besides her was one that instead of fishnet, used bandages to cover her body. Frankly, not much better. She continued twisting and turning through various movements. It looked like a dance the way she was performing. Then all at once, she stopped and turned into water falling into the lake. The action thoroughly confused Naruto until he felt a hand on his shoulder, and someone lift themselves quickly over the stone to plop down and sit next Naruto. "I usually charge for lessons, you know," she said with a smile as she turned her head to look at Naruto. Naruto nearly flinched when she sat down next to him, but her smile calmed him down considerably. He stayed silent for a moment as he looked out over the lake to where she was formerly. "So how were you doing all of that? Like walking on water?" Naruto asked, genuinely curious, as he turned back to face the woman. The woman looked amused and replied, "I'm Mei Terumi, nice to meet you too," she said in an overly cheerful voice that held hints of sarcasm, which indeed got Naruto to flinch and look slightly ashamed. "Sorry," he said in embarrassment, "I'm Naruto, Uzumaki Naruto," he said slowly, hoping she wasn't like most whom after learning of his name often make excuses to leave. However, to his surprise the woman just chuckled in amusement. "Uzumaki Naruto, eh?" She closed her eyes and leaned back with both hands on the rock as she gently began swinging her feet back and forth. She looked quite relaxed. "I've heard quite a bit about you around town." She followed her question by opening her right eye to peer at Naruto to gauge his reaction. Naruto scowled a bit at the mention of his reputation, but said nothing. So the woman continued. They say that you are a demon and can't be trusted. She finished her statement slowly, making sure to say every word. Naruto's expression turned sour once she said that. That you are a real handful? She sent him a questioning glance. The boy looked as if he was ready to just get up and leave. Yet her steady hand that she put on the boy's shoulder kept him in place. Good thing for you. I don't always believe what I hear, she said with a grin as she leaned forward to get in Naruto's view. Naruto, on the other hand, was going through a range of emotions with his encounter with this Mai Tarumi. He wasn't a complete idiot, unlike what most people thought about him. He knew this woman must have been someone from another village that was just visiting for the Chunin exams. However, it was surprising to say the least. He had met plenty of people from other village, and frankly they were the only people that would ever give him the time of day in the village. However, if they had already heard about his reputation from the villagers, and they usually do, most of them find it wise just to avoid him, and that was rather easy to do considering all they have to say is avoid the blonde-haired blue-eyed boy and they would be fine since he was the only one whom existed in the village. I also saw the poster. You are going to be in the upcoming Chunin exam, right? She said, giving the boy a questioning glance. Naruto got his emotions back under control, but still didn't trust his voice to broadcast what he was feeling, so he resigned to merely nodding at the woman's question. She now sat up, and in the process got in quite close proximity with the boy, as she rested her hand on his leg while picking up a few pebbles of the ground and lobbing them into the lake for amusement. So then why aren't you training with your sensei? I hear that the Hyuga are rather dangerous opponents. If I was in your shoes I would be training constantly with my sensei. Naruto clenched his fists at the thought of his sensei. Sasuke was probably out there with Kakashi now, learning all sorts of cool jutsus that would just leave him in the dust when he got back. Then he would get praised even more than he does when he beats Gaara. Sakura will be fawning over him even more than she usually does, and he would never get the time of day. He would just be told to work on chakra control or the basics. Naruto ran a hand through his hair and tried to remain calm. My sensei, he said the word sensei with a bitter taste with a pause before continuing. Kakashi is going to go train my teammate Sasuke for the month. If Naruto was looking at the woman, he would have seen the slightest unnerving glint in her eyes when he said that. He left you here? Unsupervised? Forsaking you for another teammate? Something tells me this isn't the first time, Naruto-kun, she said slowly, with hints of worry in her voice. Naruto scowled. For some reason the woman who was sitting next to him always knew the correct choice of words to say to get under his skin. He prided himself on having a metaphorical mask that he could keep up at all times. A mask he could hide behind to pretend that things didn't bother him when they actually did. Yet here was this woman speaking to him as if there was no mask at all, or as if she knew exactly what to say to just slip under the mask for a mere moment to get her point across. Naruto stood up and got ready to leave, no longer wanting to continue this conversation any longer. Yet once he made his stand, the woman proposed an offer that he couldn't refuse. Well then, Naruto-kun, how about I teach you? I am from the Hidden Mist village, but I can see that you have a lot of untapped potential, and it would be a pleasure to help you reach your potential over this next month. I believe I could teach you quite a bit of things that you would find useful. Naruto turned to face the woman and gave her a questioning glance. Like? How do I even know you are qualified to teach? The woman turned to Naruto and cocked an eyebrow at him. Well, Naruto, you don't. You just need to trust me. What other options do you have? Naruto said nothing. For some reason he knew the woman's statement was that of a rhetorical question. I am going to have to decline. I have had some bad experiences in the past with teachers deceiving me. The woman shrugged her shoulders and stood up and walked to the water, calling at Naruto. All right then, Naruto. I wish you the best of luck with whomever you hope to train with in the coming month, she said as she took her first step out onto the water as several clones of her began to rise up out of the water. Naruto carried on looking at the woman for several minutes as he watched her go through several sets of taijutsu. He didn't think much more of it than that until she did only what appeared to be 3 seals and a giant water dragon appeared out of the water circling her clones. The giant beast gave a roar before flying up and crashing back down, merging once again with the water. Naruto pursed his lips and thought over what the woman said to him and sighed before saying, "Damn it," and going off towards the lake where the woman was. Mai Tarumi didn't show it, but she was barely containing a smile. She had a plan, and the plan was very simple. She wanted to get the boy loyal to her, and she knew that by this point in life it wouldn't take that much. The boy had been ostracized his entire life in his own home. No one bothered to give the boy a chance, and she could tell just by the way they looked at the boy. They gave him condescending stares left and right as if the boy was useless and not worth one's time of day. Yet that was far from the case, and that was why she was here. The Mist Village was formerly a strong nation that had the world's greatest sword wielders in all of the nations. Their power for a time was unrivaled. However, now with the long ongoing war that was imposed by the last two Mizukage, that power diminished. Nearly all of the bloodlines in the country had since been purged. If she were to be honest with herself, the best day in the lives of the people whom lived in the water country, as of recent, was the death of the fourth Mizukage. He had changed from the young charming boy he once was in a single night, and turned into a ruthless tyrant that followed in the Sandame's footsteps. In short, the reason why she was here for Naruto was to obtain the one thing the mist lacked presently: power. They were lucky with the fact that at least 2 of the 7 shinobi swordsmen had stayed loyal to the mist throughout the war. That fact of the matter was that with the loss of 5 of their strongest shinobi, and the purge of the bloodlines, the mist was no more powerful than that of the snow, waterfall, or rain villages. Something which needed to be corrected quickly. When she had received intelligence that Konoha had a Jinchuriki that had no ties to the village, and seemingly wanted to become the Hokage with no real reason as to why besides the fact that people would acknowledge him, she had a simple plan. The boy grew up without anyone ever giving him the time of day, or never having time for him in general. She would be the first person that would be there for him. Frankly, the plan was simple, manipulative, and effective. Desperate times called for desperate measures. She could only hope that she didn't grow too emotionally attached to the boy, for when she would reveal to him who she is, she could only hope that the boy would side with her and follow her. She was confident that he would, she just didn't want to become overconfident. She heard a speech that had been passed down from generation to generation in the mist. It was that from some wandering nobody whom was in the art of crafting toy puppets and was said to have a repertoire of 102 puppets at the time. Yet that wasn't what was important about the man. What was important was what he said. He said that people tried to coast through life putting forth as little effort as necessary to get by. When left unchecked, people rationalize away the reasons they should do their best, or even do at all. He felt that what keeps people in check is judgment of other people they care about. He gave the examples of people wanting their parents to be proud of them, their love interests to notice them, the people they admire to befriend them, and that was why they try. The wise puppeteer said these connections to other people are strings that constantly tug at you, pulling you in this or that direction. Without these strings to tug at them, people, like puppets, are inclined to do nothing at all. Truly a wise statement, but nothing groundbreaking, of course, until May continued to listen to the story of this man and analyzed what he had to say. A young boy whom at the time was listening to the puppeteer could only say that it wasn't right to compare people to puppets, which naturally got the puppeteer talking once again. Perhaps, the old man said, giving a pause for dramatic effect, but assuming I'm correct for a moment, what happens when someone becomes disconnected from the strings? When everyone a person cares about dies or leaves, or when they never had anyone to begin with. They are left adrift in an empty world, without ties to other people, and thus very little purpose in their lives. That was where Naruto came into all of this. The boy was born an orphan, and the only ties to other people that cared about him were weak ones. The Hokage whom was busy running a village and only saw Naruto a few times a year? Or the owners of a ramen bar that he came to become friends with because of his unhealthy addiction and pitiful budget? What reason did the boy honestly have to try hard to become a ninja? With no one to judge him, or to question him for not trying hard enough? His own sensei had cast the boy off to the side in favor of a different student. Naruto was, and still is, stuck in a state where he alone had to gauge when he would stop trying. He had no one to tell him that there was a solution to his problems. The boy was a shell of a human, a person that had lost hope. Therein was why she was confident. She could change the boy, change him so that he no longer subconsciously doubted himself. So that he no longer thought he was just wasting not just his time by the time of other people. The fact that he would have a mentor, a real teacher, that could tell him that there was a solution to his problems, and that it was within his reach. Her actions, she knew, would not just boost the boy's confidence, but it would give him hope. Her and her alone would be his reason to try hard, to not let her down because she and she alone believed in him and gave him the time of day. She knew from first glance that Konoha had failed their Jinchuriki, and the most obvious part about their failure might as well have been a bright neon sign with great big letters pointing to the boy saying, "I'm clingy." The boy was clingy, not by nature, but by a product of his environment. He would cling to her like a lost puppy after a minor gesture of goodwill. The boy was desperate, and desperation only attracts vultures. While May didn't like to compare herself to that of a vulture, she knew there was not much else left to the situation. She was there to poach their Jinchuriki by showing the boy that the grass was in fact greener on the other side. If it came down to her having to put herself in a situation where she would show the boy love for his first time, he would forever be shackled to her at the hip. The boy would never leave her. So while her situation and what her plans for the boy may be cold, and that she may be that of a vulture, she'd much rather be the vulture that pecks at the boy's side rather than the den of lions that repeatedly rips the boy to shreds day by day. Naruto sighed as he stripped himself of his jacket, shirt, and sandals before wading into the lake and calling out to the woman whom was now sitting cross-legged on it. He swam out to the center of the lake at a relaxed pace, as he saw the woman open her eyes and take notice of him. He swam right up to her, at which point he was swimming right in front of Mei, whom had since moved from sitting to a crouch on one knee. It became obvious to Naruto that the woman was not going to acknowledge him any more than just staring at him, before he said anything. Especially since he had blown her off not more than 10 minutes ago. "I'm sorry," Naruto said with a frown, doing his best to avoid the woman's gaze. He was terrible with apologies, not because he didn't feel like apologies were necessary, but because he had never been given the opportunity to really give any. "I do need your help. You are all I got," Naruto said, trying his best to sound sincere and not make it seem as if the woman was a last resort. Mei in turn grinned at the apology. There was no point in trying to give the boy a hard time over it when he said he was sorry, and came back to her. "All right. Then I want your undivided attention this month, Naruto-kun, is that understood? I want you to give me everything you got, and if you are not, I will just stop training you. Why would I help someone whom isn't trying their hardest?" Naruto nodded slowly at her statement as he continued to bob up and down in the water, as he did his best to stay afloat. Mei gave a charming smile that did its best to calm the boy. She reached down into the water and grabbed the boy from under his armpits and hoisted him out of the water, despite his initial protests. She ignored any ramblings the boy was saying about essentially being hoisted in mid-air over a lake. She calmly said, "All right, first lesson shall be dancing." Naruto stopped complaining about how he was hoisted up and instantly wondered if training with this woman was a bad idea, until she continued her statement. "On top of water," she finished with a glint of amusement in her eyes as she watched Naruto's face go through several various emotions. "Anyways, this is what I want you to do, Naruto. Review please and tell me what you think of the first chapter. Usually I post whenever I finish a chapter. However, I am in a situation now where I actually finish several chapters before posting. So I am likely just going to post whenever I feel comfortable with the review count for the chapters. Some of you may feel this is selfish and whatnot, and some may feel I don't support people fishing for reviews. However, I am genuinely curious about what people think about my stories. If I wasn't, I wouldn't bother sharing them. So it takes 5 minutes of your time to provide feedback that could possibly turn me into a better writer. Any feedback, good or bad, is greatly appreciated. Edit. Son of a, this is me reposting the story. I realized from some reviews that were mentioning that there were no scene breaks, that fanfiction had screwed up the format of my scene breaks. They are usually 2 rows of X's as you see above, but slightly longer. For some reason they didn't go through. So I apologize there. I typically don't have such terrible story format, and didn't even realize that was happening. Also, thank you everyone that reviewed thus far, and the people that pointed out the scene breaks. If you had not pointed them out, I would have surely missed them, and feel like more of a pathetic loser than I already do. I will be sending a PM to everyone that mentioned it as well, so I can salvage what is left of my dignity. Time skip 1 week later. 3 weeks till finals. A week had passed since he had met his sensei. In truth, Naruto felt it had been a week since he had met his first real sensei. He wasn't trying to say that his previous teachers were bad, they just weren't good, he thought dryly. Naruto sighed as he fed himself another mouthful of ramen. He was having a quick meal before he would go off to meet his sensei. As the week had gone by, he had begun to believe that his sensei must have been something along the lines of a gift from Kami herself. She fell right into his lap, like an angel, when he needed her most. She then went on to not only train him, but give him her complete and fully undivided attention. She wasn't like Irika, whom barely gave Naruto a few extra pointers outside of class in his last remaining years at the academy, and that was only after he got over the fact that he had the QB in him. He didn't think he could ever really look at Irika the same way after he found out that he used to hate him. She wasn't like Kakashi, whom chose another student over him, and constantly read porn whenever he was giving the team even the slightest bit of training. No, she woke up early, and would set up the training ground that they were going to use. When Naruto got there, she was perfectly ready to work all night if he wanted to, and he often wanted to. Naruto resisted a flinch at the most recent thought. Kakashi had chose his teammate over him, and left him stranded with no one competent. Naruto had a pet peeve that he gained growing up as the QB's host, unknowingly of course. If you are going to stab a knife in someone's back, at least when called out on it, own up to it. Don't dance around the subject and try to rationalize your reasoning for the betrayal. Regardless, he liked his time with Mei. The training thus far had gone quite smooth, and if he was honest with himself, she had taught him a lot. Some practical stuff in the life of a shinobi, and other skills that were just useful to have. For example, he thought it was an utter joke when she said that she was going to teach him to dance on water. Yet when she had lifted him out of the water, and had him balance himself on her toes as he tried to grasp the right amount of chakra needed to keep himself afloat, He realized that most teachers likely wouldn't ever think of teaching him this way. They would likely just tell him the general idea and then push him into a hot spring or a pool. There was also the fact that he hadn't ever really had close contact like that with anyone. However, he would never admit the situation made him blush a bit. He could only hope the woman didn't notice. She had taken the time and used some of her own energy to ensure that he succeeded. As such, no more than a couple mere hours had passed before she had begun teaching him how to dance on top of the water. A skill that she later explained he may very well need to know sometime down the road. Then soon enough, dancing had turned to skating. Learning to skate across the water using chakra, moving at speed that typically wouldn't be possible. She had told him that this was a type of training that was implemented in the mist due to their heavy reliance on large bodies of water and water ninjutsu. By the end of the week, Naruto could glide around the water at speeds far faster than he could ever hope to run. He wanted to compare himself to how quick that fuzzy eyebrows kid was, at least before he took off those absurd weights of his. Naruto didn't think he could ever compare to that. Not without training his body a lot first. Once he had learned that concept, Mei was quick to tell him about Kenjutsu. She had seen his taijutsu stance, and felt that it was beyond repair. It would be completely useless to even attempt to try and fix the basic academy style he was using currently in time for the tournament, and as such she had given him another option. Mizukiri no Yaiba, the legendary water-cutting sword of Takigakure. Of course, Naruto didn't know of the jutsu's origins, he only knew what the jutsu did. How Mei had obtained the jutsu was a story for another time. The sword was likely the greatest of the elemental swords out there for one key fact: it was able to adapt. Swords such as the ones made of wind from Suna were strong, and useful for their impressive cutting powers. Yet in Mei's opinion, they failed in the area the water blade succeeded. The sword of water was strong, like any other blade, and could hold up against any of the other elemental blades just fine. The special quality of the water blade was its ability to change its shape. For example, in the midst of a battle, you could extend the blade's length and catch your opponent off guard. Or you could even use the blade as a water source for jutsus, once it was stable, of course. Naruto had taken some time in the late last week to try and get a grasp on how to make the technique work. However, he just wasn't able to hold the blade together. So in the meantime, he had moved on to a simple technique that he knew he would be able to master within moments. Clones. Sure, his track record wasn't that great with clones, and on paper he had a 50-50 chance of being successful with these clones. But he had a feeling that the more chakra a clone required, the better his chances at success were. Soon enough, that technique had been mastered and put under his belt. What he wanted to do with that cloning technique was to be able to perform it without the need for seals, or at least alter it so he could use one-handed hand seals like Haku had used on the bridge. Naruto calmly left the ramen bar after giving his thanks to both Ayame and her father. He knew that someday in life he would pay those two back for how kind they were to him. Those two were probably the closest people he had in his life, which in general was pretty pathetic considering he was a customer at their restaurant. It almost made him sound like an alcoholic just with an addiction to ramen? A ramaholic? He mumbled to himself lightly as he walked down the street before shaking his head clear of those thoughts. Naruto walked at a brisk pace to the training ground where Mei was sure to reside, likely having already set up the training ground for whatever she felt like teaching him today. Of course, at this point he no longer cared about her sometimes questionable methods of training. She had taught him more in the past week than his previous senseis had done in months, even years. He could also barely hold in the excitement that was starting to build the closer he got to the training ground. Mei had said that she had wanted him to learn chakra control first, and then she could begin teaching him justice. Yet since he had mastered water walking by the end of last week, he couldn't help but grin as he got onto the training field, with the thought of new jutsus which he could show off, and more importantly impress Sakura-chan. Naruto-kun, Mei said with a smile acknowledging his presence as he got closer to her. Hey Mei-sensei. So what are you going to teach me today? He asked with a grin as he stripped himself of his orange jacket. Since they had been doing a lot of work on the water in recent days, he felt there was little point of him being completely in a jumpsuit for no reason. Mei gave a small smile and motioned Naruto to come towards a large rock she was standing by. Naruto, I'm afraid I found out some things about you which I would like to clarify. Naruto instantly paled the moment she said that, 1,000 thoughts going through his head a second. The most important ones that crossed his mind several times were, does she know about Kyuubi, and is she going to stop training me? Naruto reluctantly sat down beside her and waited to unveil the news of what she had heard about him. Mei ran a hand through her long auburn hair, as she swung one of her legs over the other, making her ragged dark blue clothes rise up. One of the many things he would never understand about the woman. How was it she had more beauty than any other woman he had seen in Konoha, and yet she dressed like that of someone who was homeless? Naruto, Mei began with a weak smile as she turned to look at the boy. I heard yesterday after our training. Some of the civilians of this village decided to come up to me and tell me that you are the host of Kyubi, the nine-tailed demon fox. Is that true? Alright, so she may have lied a bit, she already knew about that fact. However, it would not hurt to get the boy to trust her even more with her following actions. Naruto didn't say anything and looked at his feet, not really wanting to answer the question. Mei, however, had expected as such, and pulled the boy close, nearly onto her lap, and wrapped her arms around him. She quickly felt the boy heat up, and she knew if she could have seen the boy's face from this position, it would have been bright red. I just want you to know, Naruto-kun. She began as she began to gently run her hand through his hair. You are not the Kyubi, and in fact this only makes you far more special than I originally thought when I met you. You are a Jinchuriki Naruto. Naruto had literally felt his heart warm the moment she had told him that he was not the Kyubi, and appeared to be accepting of his situation. Of course, this didn't last long, as that feeling was quickly replaced with confusion at the term Jinchuriki. Mei, whom picked up on the boy's confusion, clarified what it meant for him, a product of human sacrifice. I know it may not sound great, but you are a hero, Naruto, and you are not alone. Naruto had taken the liberty at that point to nearly do a full 180 spin and blurt out, What do you mean I'm not alone? He asked in surprise, and an underlying tone of hope. Hoping that there was someone else out there like him. Mei smiled and ruffled his hair lightly. Well, there are 9 demons, Naruto. You just happen to have the most powerful inside you. My village, the Hidden Mist, we have 2 Jinchuriki in our ranks. They are the heroes of our village for the sacrifice they made in order for our village to survive. One of them even became the Mizukage due to the general village populace loving him. So she may have stretched the truth a bit on that one, especially since they currently only had 1 Jinchuriki, and then 1 turtle that was in a gated area of the ocean behind the Mist's main island under heavy watch. However, Naruto didn't need to know that. Naruto gave a weak smile once she mentioned that. It was a good feeling knowing that there were others out there like him. However, he couldn't help but be bitter at the fact that they were treated like heroes, whereas he was treated like the dirt beneath people's boots even with the sacrifice he had to endure throughout his life. It wasn't fair. Mei grabbed hold of Naruto's hand with the hand she wasn't using to run through the boy's hair. Naruto, Kyubi makes you special. For example, your chakra reserves must be nearly endless, right? That, and you likely never get tired? You could go without sleeping, I imagine, correct? Naruto didn't say anything, he merely nodded his head. Ever since he had found out about the fox, he had thought the thing was nothing but a curse. Nothing but a thorn in his side. Yet when he reflected back on the beast, every time he was in need, the fox was there to help him. The fox was there to make up for his lack of training. Mei continued as the boy sat in silence. Then, Naruto, I believe I have the perfect training for you, that can allow you to train 100 hours in a single hour, perhaps even 1,000 hours worth of training in a single hour. Yet first, I must give you a lesson, because over the past week I have come to understand a bits and pieces about how you act as a shinobi. Naruto had perked up at the training, but decided to stay silent, and just enjoy the close proximity he had to the woman. He imagined that this was the first time he had ever been held in the arms of anyone since the 4th Hokage had sealed the fox in him. Everyone else seemed perfectly content with ruffling his hair, as if there was a no-touching Naruto clause on the village. Naruto, you have told me about your teammate Sasuke, whom you say thinks he is so special because he has the Sharingan? You hate the fact that he is capable of just looking at a jutsu and being able to copy it, right? You think it is unfair? Mei questioned the boy in her arms as she rubbed her thumb on the back of the boy's hand. Naruto scowled at the mention of Sasuke, because it instantly made him think of what Sasuke was doing with Kakashi and the sorts of training the boy must have been getting. Naruto nodded his head in frustration. I think it is bullshit. He nearly yelled as he kicked a rather large rock several yards across the training ground. Suddenly his feelings on the subject just began pouring out. Because of those eyes of his, everyone in the village feels the need to kiss his ass. He even stole parts of a taijutsu style from one of our own shinobi. He finished in frustration. Yet why does that bother you, Naruto? She said suddenly after he finished his statement. She spun the boy off and out of her grip, and onto the ground in front of her. I am teaching you because I believe in you, Naruto. I believe that you can become great, probably one of the greatest shinobi that the world has seen in a long time. Yet, in order to become great, you need to come to terms that this is a world of killers. That your life is training, and becoming stronger. That you have to wake up every morning and realize that it is do or die. The Sharingan is a tool, an ability that allows the wielder to copy any jutsu he sees. However, don't fault him for using it, get mad that the world is the way it currently is. Your teammate Sasuke uses that ability for whatever reasons he likes, yet it all comes down to whether he should copy the ability, and at least have the knowledge of it for later use, and it very well could save his life someday. Or not to copy a jutsu, and then later down the road his life may be at stake, and he could have saved it with that single jutsu he chose not to copy because people felt it was wrong? Mei ran a hand through her hair as she knelt down next to Naruto's form on the ground and placed a firm hand on his chest. I am not trying to defend your teammate Naruto. However, I have told you before, I am not training you to be good in these finals. I am not training you to do great in these finals. I am training you to win these finals, and to be the champion of these Chunin exams. In order to do that, I need you to realize that in our life, where it is a constant struggle between life and death, there is no such thing as fair and just. I am going to train you to take every advantage, every opportunity, and then how to fight not just well, but tactically and intelligently. So do you accept that, Naruto? Or shall our training together end here? Naruto closed his eyes and took a deep breath of air. No, I understand what you are saying, he said a bit bitterly. Not that I have much of a choice, he thought bitterly. He hated the fact that she was right, not for the fact that she was right in general, but more so since the subject was about Sasuke. Even when the Uchiha wasn't around, he somehow seemed to come up. So what is this training method you have for me? He said as he gently removed the woman's hand from his chest and sat up with a frown on his face. Mei chuckled to herself and had a small smile on her face as she looked down at the boy and picked little pieces of dirt off his back. The sound of her laugh warmed Naruto's heart. He had to admit he was a bit awkward socially. He didn't really have many friends. The ones he did have, that he could loosely call his friends, were very few and far between. He couldn't even say his team was close, which was rather pathetic. Even when on a team, the members couldn't help but be at each other's throats over something. He couldn't remember the last time he had even heard playful laughter, and it not being someone specifically laughing at him. It was quite relaxing to hear. Mei stood up and sat back down on the large stone the two of them were formerly sitting on. So now, Naruto, I am going to tell you a secret, alright? Don't tell anyone. When you told me that you had possession of the Shadow Clone Jutsu, I realized how I could train you. Now, while it is one of Konoha's forbidden techniques, one of my shinobi had caught a Konoha shinobi sticking their nose in places they didn't belong in my village. As such, when captured and facing interrogation, the coward had offered to trade jutsus in order to escape interrogation and leave the country. The Kage Bunshin was one of the techniques my shinobi obtained. Naruto stared at her questioningly and tilted his head to the side silently, looking in wonder. This eventually proved to unnerve the woman, and Mei closed her eyes in frustration and asked, "Why are you staring at me like that?" Naruto paused and opened his mouth to speak before closing it. This happened several times as he tried to form the words, and he eventually said, "Well, I am just curious now about what rank you are in your village. You consistently just said that they were my shinobi, and my village my shinobi obtained. You were talking as if they were your shinobi." "I am Ju." Mei had gotten wide eyes momentarily at the boy's analysis of her statement. And here they say that Uzumaki Naruto is a bit on the slow side? She thought to herself as she realized that she would have to choose her own words more carefully when speaking to the boy from that point on. Although she could always bully him into not stressing over it, she cut him off saying, "I will tell you my rank when we arrive at the Chunin exam finals, alright, Naruto?" "No, earlier. You will also not pester me to tell you, and you will not go out seeking what rank I am. If I find out you are, our training together will be done with. Understood?" she said with a cold gaze as she looked down on the Jinchuriki. Naruto reluctantly nodded his head. He wanted to know more about Mei, but not at the cost of him losing his only teacher for this month. "The training I have never would have worked had I not found out today that you were the QB Jinchuriki." Okay, so maybe she lied a bit there. She always intended to have the boy go through with this training, she just didn't know when. The shadow clone technique is unique and different from any other clone out there that I know of. The reason for this is because the shadow clone creates an exact copy of the user, and once dispelled, any information the clone obtains when summoned is transferred back to the user. Now I know you must be thinking, why haven't I noticed it before, and this is what I believe. What you have told me from your fights, you never used the clones to do anything more than full-on frontal attacks. Frankly, Naruto, you are very tactical. They weren't really taking in more information, and I bet you felt that you were just very aware of your surroundings, rather than noticing that the clones were actually constantly sending information to you every time they were dispelled. The theory is that when you are using the clones for training, any form of training you do, besides physical training, the clones will retain that information and transfer it back to you. This training, however, would never work with anyone besides you, Naruto, because you have such high chakra reserves. Other people wouldn't be able to sustain that many clones. Do you know how many clones you can make, Naruto? Mei asked, slightly anxious as she gave her explanation. The possibilities, all the things this boy could do if he chose to train like this constantly. A single body that has the opportunity to learn a full year of experience in a mere day if done right. He could be the most powerful shinobi on the planet. She could only thank Kami that other villages didn't know the Kage Bunshin Jutsu, and Konoha had kept their Jinchuriki ignorant. Otherwise, all of the Jinchuriki in the world could have thousands of years under their belt in experience before they have even left their teens. Naruto frowned as he thought about it. He had been told that creating shadow clones were dangerous, but in all honesty, he had never felt the slightest chakra drain using them. That part he naturally blamed the fox for, not that it was a bad thing, of course. Naruto shrugged after thinking it over. I could probably make 1,000 or something like that just fine. I don't really feel any chakra drain when I make them, so I don't know how many I can make really. Mei did her best to hold in her surprise when the boy said that he could make 1,000 clones if not more. However, when the boy had told her that, a whole new idea had come to mind that she couldn't help but grin at. Naruto, I have several things I need to help you with, such as your seal which you told me about. I will eventually get to it, but tell me, what do you know about your Night-Aim Hokage? Scene break. Naruto sighed as both he and Mei went off for their break from training. She had been training him since 8:30 in the morning till 3:30 in the afternoon. To most ninja, they wouldn't consider that very long. However, what she had Naruto do would have tired any shinobi out. Naruto didn't know what Mei was getting at when she mentioned the Night-Aim Hokage. Yet after she explained how the Night-Aim Hokage became one of the greatest shinobi in the world, and thought of as the world's greatest water jutsu user by even shinobi of the mist, his chakra reserves were that of which she could compare to a former shinobi in her ranks. Naturally, Naruto wanted to comment when she said her ranks, but he bit his tongue so he wouldn't lose his teacher. The shinobi had since left her ranks, Hashikage Kisame, supposedly the greatest of the 7 shinobi swordsmen. He had a chakra supply of that of a tailed beast, and that was whom she compared the Night-Aim to. She explained to him that her people had been trying for years to pull the water molecules out of the air, to do water jutsus without any pre-existing resource. However, it was just impossible for the average shinobi. The concept of pulling the water out of the air is extremely simple, yet the reason no one can do it is for the fact that they literally need to saturate the air around them constantly with bits of their chakra. It wouldn't really be that great of a technique if it weren't for the fact that since it is your chakra saturating the air, only you can use the water in the air, and no one else can just come out of a corner and create a water dragon right in your face. So with that thought in mind, she had Naruto start working on the technique with the assistance of clones. Again, it wasn't a hard concept or skill to learn. Many of her shinobi in the mist could do it, just not effectively due to how much chakra was required to do so. As such, Naruto had picked up the technique quite quickly and was able to do it in a single area effectively. Now her task for him was one that she was even forcing him to practice now. Saturating the air with chakra even as they moved around. Something that would certainly be harder to do, but if he could learn how to do it. He had the makings of becoming one of the best water users in the world simply because he could create water jutsus without a pre-existing source. They rounded the corner, and Naruto started making his way to Ichiraku ramen, but he was halted by Mei's firm hand on his shoulder. You need to eat something other than ramen. There is nothing wrong with how much you eat, however I am not going to sit here and eat ramen for another week. Come on. She finished spinning the boy around in the other direction. Soon enough they were upon the barbecue restaurant frequently visited by Team Asuma, so naturally he wasn't surprised when he saw their team there along with Yuhi Kurenai. However, what Naruto didn't expect was to catch sight of Guy's team. The sight of Niji made him scowl. Not for the fact that they were to be pitted against each other in the exams, but for the fact that the guy was an asshole. Who the hell hospitalizes their own cousin, even after he knew she was beat? When Naruto and Mei were getting seated, as Naruto walked by Niji, he kicked his chair quite hard, making it slide a good foot. Usually ninjas have an expert sense of balance, and it wouldn't have been a problem except for the fact that Niji was busy eating as if he was at some high-end ceremony. So the meat he had between his chopsticks fell flat to the floor. He appeared quite angry the moment it happened until he realized whom did it. He said just loud enough for Naruto to hear, "You should really respect your betters dead last." Their interaction had gained the attention of most in the restaurant, and they waited patiently for Naruto's comeback, if he had one. Naruto held back a scowl at Niji using the insult that was used by most of his classmates. He wondered if the fact that he had the lowest scores, and was the dead last in the academy, would plague him for the remainder of his shinobi career? Doing his best to not show that the comment bothered him, he shot back, "Whatever you say, girly locks." Naruto had to admit he felt rather lame with that insult. However, it isn't about how the insult sounds, it is about the reaction you get out of the person. Niji bristled in his seat and self-consciously adjusted his hair a bit. He tried to look amused at the insult, despite the glare in his eyes. "I see. I guess failures flock together. I can see why Hinata is taken with you," he said calmly in a level speaking voice. It didn't stop the said voice from reaching all corners of the room since it was dead silent, everyone curious about the encounter between the Hyuga prodigy and the village scapegoat. Mei put a hand on Naruto's shoulder on that comment, hoping that Naruto wouldn't do something stupid. Yet Naruto wasn't called the most unpredictable ninja for nothing. Naruto shrugged out of Mei's grasp in an instant, and stormed up to Niji over his comment about Hinata. It was fine if you were going to harass him, but it angered him when anyone would drag in any of his friends between one of their arguments. Naruto got into the boy's face, who had since stood up and glared down at Naruto. "I'll remember that when I got my foot on your face, and pulling that stick out of your ass in the finals, Hyuga," Naruto said with a snarl at the older boy before him. Neji gave a fake smile, but in an instant Naruto was sent tumbling back by a quick gentle fist palm thrust to his chest that left Naruto in a world of pain, and with blood coming out of his mouth. Everyone knew that they would have stopped the encounter if they knew one of them would have resorted to violence. That, and no one expected it to be Neji who lost his cool in the argument. Guy looked gobsmacked at the fact that his student would do something so unyouthful. Although before he could make a comment about it, Neji excused himself, stating, "I have to train for the more impressive fighters in the upcoming exam." Mei was kneeling down beside Naruto, and promptly gathered the attention of all the people in the room since Neji had left. Her hand rested on Naruto's chest and began to grow green, and she said calmly, "You should be more in check of your emotions." Naruto, laying down, had tears in his eyes from the severe burning pain in his chest. Yeah," he said through gritted teeth. "I will get him back though," he said in a gasp. Mei shook her head. "I won't always be here to help you. You know that, right?" Her statement was a rhetorical question. She knew that he knew she wouldn't always be around. She could only hope he wouldn't do anything stupid like that again. Naruto gave a weak nod as he laid there. Mei did her best to brighten the boy's spirits by asking him a simple question, "So what do you want to eat?" Naruto produced a strained laugh at the "what do you want to eat," but shook his head as he picked himself up on weak legs. "I'm not hungry anymore," he said slowly as he started making his way out of the restaurant, leaving shinobi of all ages looking at his retreating form. Naruto had a huge grin as he made his way down the street to the clothing store. Ever since Naruto had started applying shadow clones to his training, every day, no, every hour, he would grow in leaps and bounds. He had since perfected drawing out water from the air around him. It put a strain on his body, but he was sure that would lift as he used it more often. However, that wasn't why he was grinning, because he learned far more than that. The water-cutting sword he hadn't been able to really get a hang of last week was now perfected within an hour of training at the beginning of the week. Since then he had been training personally with Mei off to the side on his body and how to utilize the sword to the best of his ability. The style was interesting. It was based on being extremely fast over bodies of water and dealing quick and overwhelming Kenjutsu blows with the ever-shape changing blade. Naruto just wished he could figure out a way to take the style to the next level. So in the meantime, while trying to figure out a way about making the style better, he had begun mastering random jutsus designated by Mei as he personally worked on his body. The first, and definitely most memorable of jutsus that he was taught was the water prison. Mei explained to Naruto how the prison was often used just to stop the enemy's movements, and then finishing them off when they had nowhere to run. Much to her displeasure, she described how the 7 shinobi swordsmen were well known for using the ability to disable half of a team, and forcing them to watch as they killed off the other half before them. Naruto knew he could only be thankful that they had that reputation and tendencies. If Zabuza had chosen to take care of Kakashi the moment he caught him in the water prison, him and his entire team would be dead by now. There was one thing that made him smile when he thought about this training though. Zabuza could have killed Kakashi, and the battle was over before it even began. Added to the fact that Haka could have stepped in at any time. The concept that those water users were not only stronger than Kakashi, but stronger than his entire team combined regardless of their injuries. Well, his entire team minus Kyuubi. The fox was just an unfair advantage in any circumstance. Regardless, the thought made him grin that he was learning some of the water jutsus that had been used by shinobi better than his sensei. The next jutsu he came to learn over the week was very entertaining to watch when coupled with the fact he could do water jutsu without a source, which of course was just pulling the molecules out of the air. The water wall, a standard water jutsu that became legendary in the hands of Konoha's Nidaime Hokage. The jutsu would create a spinning vortex of water around the user that operated like a shield. Due to its spinning properties, it was nearly impenetrable by most jutsus. The only ones that could really stop the technique were solid earth techniques. Even the counter-element, lightning, was rendered useless in the hands of the late Hokage. The water's current would merely provide a channel for the lightning to flow on before it would fizzle out like some weak firecracker. Naruto had also begun trying to create one jutsu that he felt could assist him in making this Kenjutsu style he was learning even better. The problem was he was trying to learn it with one-handed hand seals, because if he couldn't do it with one-handed hand seals or without the use of seals, the technique was completely useless to him. Naruto broke himself from his train of thought as he appeared in front of the shinobi clothing store. Much to his displeasure, he found both Sakura and Ino in one corner of the store, and he did his best not to be noticed. Mei, despite the clothing she wore, seemed to have a ton of money. She gave Naruto an absurd amount of cash to buy his clothing from the store, and she just said, "Get something nice and blue." Naruto could barely contain his grin. He usually never had money to buy clothes that he wanted, so he stuck to the orange jumpsuit. However, he did like blue, it matched his eyes quite well. Of course, Naruto wasn't some fashion hound, but he did have a sense of what looked good and what didn't. It all came down to the money to buy it. Naruto was already in quite impressive shape before his training with Mei. He just never showed off his figure due to the fact that he always wore baggy jumpsuits. The training Mei had him doing only further improved how toned his muscles were. The standard training of a civilian could take months to obtain a desired level of fitness, where with a shinobi it could be done in mere weeks with the assistance of chakra. One of the reasons Naruto couldn't help but be impressed with Lee, whom didn't have that privilege and yet still kept in the best shape possible. Now Naruto was by no means bursting at the seams with his muscles, but he did have muscles that were hard as a rock, that were hidden by his jumpsuit. Yet with the money in hand, he had the intent of buying something that showed off how hard he worked, and show everyone that he worked extremely hard at becoming a ninja, contrary to popular belief. Naruto walked over to the area of the store dedicated to pants and shorts among other things. He was doing good staying out of Ino and Sakura's line of sight as well. Naruto pulled some very dark blue overalls off the rack that he knew would loosely cling to his body, and the lower half would actually be quite loose on him. Naruto was a fan of overalls since he was a kid, mainly because before you can buy shinobi clothing you have to be in your final years of the academy. So in the meantime, Naruto would always wear these green overalls over a black shirt with his green goggles and run around causing mass chaos. Naruto did have a feeling though he would look rather nerdy wearing overalls, so he held on to them but did his best to try and find something else he could use to spice up the outfit. He walked past a series of standard shinobi pants, something he didn't really want. He had been standing out his entire life, no point trying to conform now. Especially when it appeared that no one really gave a damn about him, particularly his sensei Kakashi. That thought naturally made him scowl, and brush his was past the typical chunin, jounin, and umbu pants that reminded him all too much of Kakashi's typical attire. Naruto came across a rack with an assortment of different sashes, and for a moment he for some reason became mesmerized and began thinking over his potential outfit in his head. There were numerous sashes just hanging there, typically worn by sword specialists, but on rare occasions by shinobi. They were mostly all in bright colors such as red, orange, and yellow, likely trying to stay true to Konoha, showing its will of fire. However, there were a few others, such as a simple black sash. There was one that did stand out from all of the rest, and he knew with Mei telling him to get something blue, she would love this. The sash was long, going down to the ankles. It only covered one side of his leg, so it certainly would be an interesting contrast to see one leg covered to the ankle, and another showing the standard overall shorts that went a bit past his knees. When Naruto picked up the blue sash, he realized that it had an intricate black design that reminded him of something along the lines of sea dragons, or sharks diving and re-emerging on the water's surface. He quickly took it off the rack and draped it over his arm with a grin. He now realized that with his current clothing, having any form of tool pouch would be rather odd, so he didn't even bother looking for them. It wasn't like the style he was working on with Mei was really reliant on ninja tools anyways. If something came up that changed that, well, he could cross that path when he came to it. Naruto walked to the other side of the room where there were several assortments of armors on the wall. It ranged from chainmail, to small bucklers, to full-on gauntlets. Naruto, when he saw the gauntlets, could only grin. He had been doing things big his entire life, no point stopping now. Go big or go home, right? He thought to himself with an amused smile. He grabbed a gauntlet off the wall that would cover his entire left arm. The thing appeared to be flexible, but he still needed to try it on. The one thing he was happy about was that prospect of it being another way to block incoming attacks. He wielded his sword in his right hand, and most battles between two skilled opponents with a sword often revolved around a series of parries before a final blow. However, if he could just snatch an opponent's blade out of the air mid-swing, and then cut him with Naruto's own water sword. While slightly dangerous, it was far more useful than anything else he could spot in this store. Naruto didn't notice as he made his way to the changing room, but he had attracted the attention of both Ino and Sakura, who moved over to stand right outside the changing room waiting for him. Ino moved with Sakura and sat down in the chairs just outside the changing room. "Why are we waiting here for Naruto?" Sakura asked dryly as her friend forced her to sit down and wait for the boy. It wasn't that Sakura hated Naruto, it was just he was so annoying with how much he asked her out. Why wouldn't he ever understand no means no? Sakura had conveniently ignored the fact that Sasuke had told her no countless times as well, because frankly, what did that have to do with anything really? Ino sighed forehead. "Where have you been? How can you not be the slightest bit interested in Naruto right now?" Ino said in exasperation, surprising Sakura sitting next to her. "Didn't you hear about his encounter with Neji? Nearly everyone from our class was there. Where have you been?" Naruto and Neji both got at each other's throats. I mean, who would have thought that Naruto of all people would have made it to the finals? Ino laughed a bit to herself, and recalled him the dead last. she said with a weak smile on her face. Sakura pursed her lips at this information. She actually did hear about the encounter Naruto had with Neji, but really paid it no mind because she was all hung up on when Sasuke would be returning to the village. That thought put a sour taste in her mouth that she had so blatantly ignored one of her teammates in favor of another when they were both in the finals. What if Naruto needed her help or something? However, this only brought up more questions, like why wasn't Kakashi-sensei training Naruto as well as Sasuke out of the village? She didn't get her questions answered as Naruto walked out of the changing room. His outfit in her opinion was completely odd and stood out, but at the same time looked quite good. She would never admit it out loud, but Naruto looked good in blue. It matched his eyes. Ino, however, was much more vocal in her opinion of his clothing. Between the whistling and playful cat calls she sent his way, which promptly caused Naruto to spin around red in the face. "I love it, Naruto, you look great," she said as she moved closer to the boy. "However, the overalls really?" she said as she shook her head. Naruto currently had his overalls up, with the straps over his shoulders. However, by Ino's look, he knew she felt that in her eyes it just didn't work and was not afraid to tell him. Before Naruto could react, he was in Ino's grasp, and she was taking his arms out of the straps. She then proceeded to make light incisions into the sides of the overalls, and folded them over his waist and let the straps just hang there loosely, barely covering the lower half of the overalls or part of the sash. "Ino! What are you doing? I haven't even bought these yet," he said quickly, gritting his teeth. "Oh hush, I'm making you look good," she said as she waved her hand playfully as she continued to go to work on his clothing. Sakura, whom was just standing off on the sides this entire time thinking of all of the bad things she could say about Ino to Sasuke, like how she was all over Naruto in a clothing store, suddenly stopped her train of thought. When Ino had pulled down the overalls and folded them on his waist, they both never expected for it to reveal tight six-pack abs. It was common knowledge that you needed next to no body fat to be able to show off abs like that. Thus was the big mystery. How did this idiot, she thought in wonder, how does he have such low body fat with how much he eats? She got a red tint to her cheeks as she continued to look at Naruto, and promptly looked away. Ino, on the other hand, being far more confident, and less shy than Sakura, tapped her hand against Naruto's abs a couple times before saying, "Impressive. Someone has been working out at Naruto," she said with a wink which made the said blonde blush before she reached up to the boy's blue headband. She noticed as soon as she began to untie it that he double-wrapped the headband, hiding half of his length. The action of her untying his headband nearly made Naruto push the girl off of him. That was one of the things he didn't want anyone to put their hands on. While he didn't like the news he heard about Irika all those months ago, it was still one of the best gifts he had ever gained. He wasn't going to have some random person fuck it up. Although at present time he was too surprised with the fact that he was this close to one, if not the most popular girl in his graduating class, as she fawned over him and touched his body. His teenage body was having a bit of trouble adjusting to the situation. Ino quickly adjusted Naruto's headband in a way she felt would look best on him, and much to Naruto's surprise she adjusted it exactly to the way Zabuza had his headband on. Over the head with remaining length of the headband going down the side of his face. Naruto took a step back from Ino and examined himself momentarily in the mirror. He had to admit, her look was 1,000 times better than what he had worn before, but still he felt the need to throw out some form of a false time constraint. He felt that if he didn't soon, he would be stuck her modeling clothes for Ino all day. "Hey Ino, thanks for the help, but I really need to get going. You know, things to do, people to see? All of that stuff," he said quickly as he backed his way out of the changing room. He gave a quick wave to Sakura, but nothing more than that as he briskly made his way to the counter. He dropped a bit more than the desired amount of money on the counter, not bothering to wait for his change, and quickly made his way outside. Unfortunately for him, it appeared that both Sakura and Ino were in the mood to follow him, like they had nothing better to do. On any other day, he would have loved the attention he was getting from the two girls, but not when he was busy training for the finals. Naruto rounded a corner and stopped as his gaze narrowed. In front of the shinobi weapon shop stood both Neji and Tenten. Neji was facing the opposite direction, with Tenten facing Naruto, albeit from a significant distance. Naruto held back a growl at the sight of the boy. Normally he wouldn't attack someone from behind, especially when intending to start a fight. However, the fucking white-eyed asshole had attacked him last time they met, and this time his ass was going down. Naruto marched up at a rather quick pace, preparing to hit the boy quite hard in the back of his head with his gauntlet-encased fist. He was going to take much pride in knocking that all-seeing girly-looking prick to the ground. Naruto rushed up in the final steps, getting ready to attack the supposed Hyuga prodigy, but this action was noticed by Tenten, whom rushed in front of Naruto and nearly hugged him at the chest, doing her best to hold back the impressively strong boy. "Naruto," she said quickly as she tried her best to push him back several feet, which was nearly impossible until both Sakura and Inohum were following him and stepped in and assisted the girl. There was no need for some brawl between the two to happen in the middle of the streets. Naruto, shocked at the fact that 3 people were restraining him, couldn't help but voice his opinion when Niji turned around. "Let me at that girly bastard. I'll turn his white eyes black and blue," he said as he shook against his human restraints. Tenten turned to her teammate. "Niji, get out of here, there is no need for another fight." Yet by the time she had said that, she realized what her teammate intended to do. The Hyuga genius had since activated his family bloodline, and as Tenten stepped off from trying to restrain the blonde and moving to restraining her black-haired teammate, it was too late. The black-haired genius was too quick. He once again had slid in and given Naruto a vicious palm thrust to the chest, while Naruto was being restrained by 2 girls whom thought they were helping the boy. The girls instantly let go of the boy on reflex when they saw the attack coming, hoping that Naruto would get out of the way. Yet Naruto could only slump to the floor and once again, luckily this time not coughing up blood. Through blurry vision he watched as the Hyuga prodigy smirked and gave him a condescending stare and saying, "Give up, Uzumaki, you are fated to lose against me always. It would only be foolish for you to intend to fight me at the finals," he said calmly before walking off. Tenten had rushed over to Naruto, nearly shouting in his ears a string of apologies with slightly teary eyes. She didn't know Naruto that well, but the fact of the matter was that her actions were the ones that caused him to get hurt. That fact alone hurt her own pride. With her role model being Tsunade, one of the legendary Sannin, the greatest healer in the world. Her actions causing someone to get hurt, and having no way to help the boy afterwards, well, it was a significant blow to her pride. She had intended to stop a fight, and thought that her teammate would have taken the high road. She knew that Niji could get violent, but the boy was never even that violent with Lee. She had no idea why this boy got on her teammate's bad side so easily. Niji wasn't one to just get angry and attack someone over a simple tournament. There had to be something more to this rivalry that was starting to grow between the two, something more than just the upcoming finals. Naruto grit his teeth as he sat up. He wasn't in near as much pain at the first time, perhaps it was like he was used to the familiar burning in his chest. Still, it didn't stop a scowl from spreading to his face as he stood on shaky legs. He looked down the long street as the Hyuga prodigy turned the corner, and his first thought was to chase after him. However, he took a deep breath and relaxed himself. He knew he had things to take care of, but he did know there would be one place he would be visiting later. The library. Scene break. Scene break. Time skip, 7 days till the finals. Naruto gave a heavy sigh as he walked down the street beside Mei. He was close to mastering the technique he had been working on. He had technically already accomplished his intended goal with the technique. He just wanted to try and be able to utilize the technique without hand seals to make the skill all the more powerful. The technique wasn't even hard really, it was merely a variation on another technique. However, if he could do it without hand seals, it could prove to be one of the more deadly abilities out there, and in his arsenal. That aside, he did have fun learning several techniques over the course of the week. This week, unlike last week, it was mostly offensive techniques, much to Naruto's pleasure. The first jutsu was one he knew very well. Hell, how could he ever forget the first really destructive jutsu he had seen? The water dragon. When Mei had told him that he would be learning that, at first he wanted to laugh, until he realized that she was serious. She didn't even teach him the technique that required 40 seals. She told him that shinobi from the Hidden Mist village once upon a time stole a scroll from an enemy village in hopes to learn several techniques. Among these techniques were genjutsu such as the Bringer of Darkness technique, but more importantly, the person they stole it from created a way to utilize the water dragon jutsu with a single hand seal. Truly an amazing feat, unfortunately for her, and the shinobi that stole the technique. The single hand seal was only viable for a water dragon if you had enough chakra to just override the need to use all of the seals to do the different chakra moldings required for the technique. Now there was always a saying among shinobi, and civilians alike, that goes something along the lines of you need to learn to crawl before you can walk, you need to learn to walk before you can run. Essentially saying that there was an order in the way things get done. Naruto found out this week that Mei did not believe in that order, at least when it came to training. Naruto felt that if she was an instructor teaching students how to swim, she would take them into the center of a lake, and push them off and telling them to swim to shore. Dangerous, but usually quite effective. So when Mei had come to him and told him that if he didn't get this technique right, he would blow off his arms, well, he chose to stick to it but be extra careful, which meant using clones as sacrificial lambs as he began to learn the technique. Later on, however, after mastering the technique and realizing none of his clones actually had their arms explode, Mei had in fact told him that she had lied. Naruto felt like an idiot. The next technique he learned over the course of the week was extremely useful, and in reality Naruto thought it was the perfect offensive water jutsu. The water fang bullet. The deadly technique was simple yet effective. You could conjure yourself up tiny little whirlpools in the water that could rise up, still having the spinning motion on the water. The current that is applied to the rising water gives it the potential to maim the opponent quite effectively. The fact that you can make them sprout up virtually anywhere there is water only adds to the dangers of the technique. The last technique that Naruto was able to perfect this week was quite simple, much to contrary belief. The problem with the jutsu was the required amounts of chakra that were needed to perform it. Added to the fact that Naruto had been learning to perform this jutsu without an initial water source, well, the technique would be nearly impossible. Mei had told him that only 2 people in history, at least to her knowledge, had been able to perform such a feat without a water source. The technique was commonly used to create a watery battlefield, fueling the power of any water user out there. Yet for Naruto, this technique was mainly a way to quickly perform the ability to draw water from the air. Naruto didn't personally feel the technique was that useful for him, but he wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth on the subject. As Naruto walked down the street with Mei in step with him, he could barely contain his smile. The thought that he had come so far in such little time? All he needed was the experience, and he knew that he would become quite the shinobi. This was something Mei also took time to acknowledge, and she even told him that she would try and figure out a way for Naruto to gain some experience before the exams. Yet his happy and cheerful mood instantly turned cold as he rounded the corner on a restaurant. He then remembered exactly why he had been training, and why he had gone to the library for information. That white-eyed pretty boy was sitting in the outside area of the barbecue restaurant where they initially had their first encounter. Naruto grit his teeth at the thought of all of the encounters he had with the boy over the past month. Mei had caught eye of Naruto's sudden stop and attempted to reach out a hand to keep him calm, but it was far too late for that. Naruto had begun his approach. Meantime, at the table with Niji. The table was littered with several Konoha shinobi that had made it to the preliminary rounds of the exams. Kurenai's team was absent from the table, although she was present. Sure, she was not the greatest fan of the Hyuga male sitting at the table, but she wasn't going to let that boy get in the way of her spending time with her boyfriend, Asuma. Asuma had all of his genin here, and he had for the majority of the month had a 4th member of the team that was Sakura. Despite how much both Ino and Sakura fought each other, they still remained friends, even if distant. This only became even more evident after their battle at the preliminaries for the exam. Yet he had to admit, as bratty as the two could get, they were both rather amusing and fun company to have around. Especially with the fact that until just recently, both Shikamaru and Chuji were wrapped up with their families most of the time training. Shikamaru sat at the table leaning his head back over his chair. He was tired, and that much was obvious to everyone around the table. When his dad had found out that he had made it to the Chunin exams, despite the lazy attitude that they both shared, they had both decided to dive right into training for the finals. However, the day-to-day training wasn't so bad, at least until this week, where it had begun to take a toll on his chakra coils. It was one of the main reasons as to why he had free time right now to go out with his friends. He wasn't supposed to be training. From now on, he would just work on strategy with his dad at night before bed, and a bit more in the mornings before he went in to get his assignments for the day. Sakura and Ino spent their time at the table chatting amongst themselves. They both were throwing ideas back and forth about what exactly Sasuke was learning from Kakashi during this 1-month period. However, as they began to talk more and more, not only just now, but over the last month, about what Sasuke could be learning, Naruto came into conversation. Now it was not typical in the slightest for Naruto to be the topic of conversation for the girls. However, this month, not only just them, but nearly anyone who lived in Konoha had been thinking a bit about the young Uzumaki. The word of his encounters with the Hyuga had only served to spread across the village, and rumors spread by Yamanaka Ino spread like a cancer. The final trio worth mentioning at the table were that of Guy's team, well, of the members that could walk, that is. Lee was still held up in the hospital gravely injured. Tenten had actually shot up several notches on Naruto's favorite people list. Ever since she essentially assisted Niji in getting Naruto injured, she had been coming by his house almost daily to check up on him. If Naruto was honest with himself, it grew to be almost annoying. Yet she still insisted on checking up on him, and showing him that she was sorry. While it was a sweet and kind thing to do, there was no way it was going to stop him from getting Niji back. Especially after the entire village had gotten word of Naruto getting his ass handed to him twice by Niji. When the cheap bastard only decided to attack him at times he is not expecting it or couldn't fight back. Guy was the final member of the team whom didn't know how to act with the current situation. He prided himself with having the most youthful students around. Yet this tournament had shown him that one of his students had fallen farther than he could have imagined. Crippling your cousin? Attacking fellow Konoha shinobi multiple times? Guy didn't know if he should stand behind his student and support him, or if he should support his eternal rival's student. The group sat at the table calmly talking. They had more than likely just finished eating and were just sitting around talking and drinking their sodas. Though the group's topic was one that the village had been stumbling onto continuously. Niji, I still don't understand how you could do that. I was holding Naruto back so that you wouldn't have to fight. Why would you go and attack him? Tenten said through gritted teeth. Everyone at the table knew that the subject was extremely touchy for the weapon user, and that she felt an extreme amount of guilt about what happened. Niji stayed silent and calmly took a sip of his soda before replying, "The kid is a failure. Whether I attacked him or not had no consequences. The boy is not going anywhere, and he is nothing special. His academy records show that just fine. The fact that the Inuzuka had lost to the boy should bring shame upon his family." The group stayed silent at that, Kurenai giving the boy narrowed eyes as she let the boy's words sink in. She was tempted on putting the boy into a multi-layered genjutsu until she saw a couple turn the corner down the block. She saw Naruto and, strangely enough, that same woman whom Naruto decided to eat with a couple weeks ago walking down the block. That was until Naruto stopped dead in his tracks before clenching his fists. She knew exactly what was going to happen. She could only hope the young Uzumaki wasn't the one whom ended up hurt once again. Back to Naruto. Naruto threw caution to the wind and briskly moved in with a slight jog that slowed to a quick walk as he grew closer to the table. Mei had taught him a lot of things other than just jutsus over the month. Such as a shinobi being in control of their emotions was like an unspoken rule. Well, Naruto told himself, fuck the rules, I have never listened to them anyways. Naruto quickly rushed up to the black gate that separated the restaurant from the street, and Niji had his back to, and he promptly got the attention of everyone at the table. However, most were too surprised by his appearance to even say anything. It is too bad for Niji that his eyes couldn't see full circle at all times, or he would have seen this coming. "Hyuga Niji!" Naruto yelled as he grabbed the boy by the neck with one hand and the back of his shirt with another. "I am not going to wait for the finals." Naruto yelled as he threw the boy over the gate and caused him to roll several feet through the street. His white Hyuga robes were now covered in dirt and dust stains. The Hyuga prodigy was quick to get up with a glare of narrowed eyes and activated his Byakugan in an instant, sliding into his family's fighting stance. Naruto, however, paid no mind as he backed up to the table ever so slightly, reaching behind him to grab the alcoholic drink that Kurenai had since poured into her cup. The others at the table had expected her to protest, particularly Guy. However, Kurenai could very well care less what happened to the Hyuga prodigy, and frankly was hoping Naruto was able to give the boy a significant injury. "You backstabbing, white-eyed, girly-haired, little bitch!" Naruto said a string of curses as Niji's muscles tensed as he prepared to slide in for what Naruto didn't know, but happened to be several well-aimed tenketsu attacks that would have left the boy immobile. Niji slid in quickly, preparing to strike out with both hands, and everyone at the table thought Naruto was once again going to get his ass handed to him by the branch member. Yet Naruto once again surprised them. He pivoted to the right, letting the first strike pass right by him as he caught the boy's other hand with his free hand. Naruto then used Kurenai's alcoholic drink and splashed it into the boy's eyes. The boy didn't even see it coming. A family prided on being able to see everything close their eyes as rarely as possible to keep up with everything happening in the battlefield. The key problem with any of the eye techniques of Konoha that many fail to realize is simple. They actually have to be actively looking at you for them to work at all. Niji closed his eyes in pain, no longer seeing in his perfect full-circle vision, and spun around trying to get the burning substance out of his eyes. "Hey Niji!" Naruto yelled as he cracked his fists before sliding into a fighting stance. "Come finals, your ass belongs to me." Several people at the table had their eyes open wider in surprise as Naruto slid into the fighting stance. Hey Tenten began as she stared at Naruto in surprise. Guy finished her statement with slight disbelief in his voice. "The gentle fist fighting stance?" he said in a low whisper. Niji spun around to Naruto, having since cleared a bit of alcohol from his eyes. Niji turned to Naruto and looked at him with blurry vision, but any movement the boy could have seen, he had no time to react to. Naruto slid in with the fighting stance that Niji had used the past 2 times to attack him. It only felt just that Naruto returned the favor. He could only hope that his trips to the library to uncover exactly how the stance worked would pay off. Naruto reached his palm back, gathering chakra in it before violently hitting the Hyuga in the chest. The effect was instantaneous. The boy curled over Naruto's hand, gasping violently in pain before shooting off down the street a good 15 to 20 feet. Everyone at the table was wide-eyed in surprise, and most couldn't help but feel the slightest bit happy at the Hyuga getting kicked around by Naruto now. "Oh my god!" Ino exclaimed like a giddy schoolgirl as she grabbed Sakura by the shoulders and shook her. "Naruto just used the Hyuga family's signature style to get back at Niji? Can you believe how many people are going to start talking about this after I spread this around?" Ino said with the slightest glint in her eyes that made anyone whom knew the gossip queen well get a bit of a sweat drop in the back of their heads. Guy, Kurenai and Asuma had all stayed silent as their students got into a bit of back and forth bickering about what had just transpired. They watched and prepared to step in at any time as Naruto walked over to the now fallen Hyuga prodigy. They couldn't shake from their mind the simple idea that was not how the Hyuga fighting stance was supposed to go. However, Guy could finish the thought as he looked at the young Uzumaki in wonder, and then down the street to the young woman in ragged blue clothes. It didn't look intentional, but Naruto just used the basic steps of Tsunade's legendary taijutsu. Naruto paid no mind to all of the crowd that had now gathered around the group of them. He was too busy sifting through all the memories that flooded his head as he thought about his encounters with the boy laying at his feet. Naruto sighed deeply and reached into one of the very few pockets he had on his clothing now, and pulled out a roll of several papers held together with a string and a little tag hanging off of it. The tag read, "The Gentle Fist." The copies of the fighting stance he pulled from the library. Now who is the Hyuga to say that the fighting stance is useless without the Byakugan? Naruto didn't know a damn thing about the style. All he wanted to do was read through the basics of it, and learn that palm thrust to turn the wide-eyed girly boy into a heap of trash on the ground. Naruto set the scroll down right by Niji's face and walked away. However, if he had stuck around longer, he probably would have grinned at what he heard Ino say. "Did you see that forehead?" Naruto gave the signature Hyuga palm thrust to Hyuga Niji. "How personal can this get?" she asked in an excited tone. Even if the event had occurred several minutes ago, everyone couldn't help but admit that the blonde's energy had been rubbing off on everyone else at the table, and they couldn't help but grin at what the girl was saying. "Can you imagine what it is going to be like at the finals?" she yelled as she slammed her hand on the table with a huge grin. Everyone at the table had thought something along the lines of, "When word of this gets out, I doubt that Uchiha Sasuke vs Gaara of the Desert will be the most awaited match of the finals." Time skip, day of the finals. Naruto adjusted the gauntlet on his arm with a smile plastered on his face. He was currently in the waiting room with all of the other contestants of the Chunin exam. He was also able to note that it appeared that there were a couple contestants missing, his teammate included. Much to his disappointment, Mei hadn't been around the majority of the day. She even said they wouldn't be meeting at the typical training ground in the morning because she had things to take care of related to the Hidden Mist village. Naruto had completed his jutsu he had been working on the past month, and with Mei's urging he even worked on a simple lightning technique, if he could even call it that. It was more basic manipulation using a couple hand seals. The technique didn't even have a name, it would just shoot out a current of lightning from your hand at a given distance for a couple seconds. Naruto couldn't even hold the technique very long, especially since he hadn't even worked on lightning manipulation. However, Mei said that a couple seconds was more than enough for what she intended him to use the technique for. Naruto had pushed the thought from his head the past few weeks that Mei had told him that she was training him strictly to win. However, this week it became perfectly evident that that was the case. This week any training Naruto did for techniques was strictly on his own time because Mei had begun to work with Naruto in gaining him combat experience and developing strategy for the opponents in the exam. He never really thought he would ever enjoy it, but reading up on opponents' strategy? To him it was actually rather exciting. Not as exciting as him summoning 50 to 100 unarmed clones at a time and forcing them to fight him constantly for an entire day obtaining experience, but exciting nonetheless. Naruto's head perked up as he heard the contestants being called to the field by a man wearing a bandana with a saban in his mouth. He glanced around silently observing his opponents as they made their way to the field. His eyes lingered on Niji's form several seconds longer than the rest. To say a rivalry sprouted between the two of them this month would be an understatement. Naruto felt that there was more of a rivalry between him and Niji than there ever was between him and Sasuke. When Naruto got onto the field, his thoughts about his rivalry were only solidified. Up in the stands, one would have to be blind to not notice an entire section full of white-eyed, black-haired males and females. Yep, the fighting between him and Niji had certainly attracted the attention of most of the Hyuga clan. He even heard silent mutterings about an outraged Hyuga clan head stomping into the Hokage's office demanding for him to be punished. The thought couldn't help but make him grin. While he wasn't as close to the old man as he was in the past, he had to admit that the man didn't know how to control his shinobi. It had been spread around the village that the Hyuga clan had stormed into his office demanding Naruto's punishment. The old Sarutobi, unknown to most, was in a very bad mood. Even Naruto didn't know why. He was quick to barrage the clan head with a series of questions along the lines of, "Oh, I did not see you complaining the previous 2 weeks, Hayashi. Perhaps I should give your nephew twice the punishment of whatever you wish for me to give Naruto? Seeing as how the boy had attacked Uzumaki twice in the past 2 weeks. Or perhaps I should merely state that Uzumaki was acting in self-defensive against your clan, or more specifically your nephew. Perhaps it is because of his now, quite rational fear of being attacked by your nephew without warning?" He continued barraging the man with questions and statements which promptly led Hayashi to flee the Hokage office after a mere minute of statements and various punishments he could inflict on the Hyuga boy if Hayashi wished to play favorites. He already knew he was going to have to break the no fighting outside of the matches rule for the two young shinobi. Naruto wished he could have been there to see the Hyuga clan head's face. Naruto glanced over silently to the redhead whom was participating in the exam. Naruto remembered quite well what the boy had done to Lee. Yet he hadn't been on his mind until the past week during his training for the exams with Mei. Mei had reminded him time and time again to start paying more attention to the red-headed boy, seeing as how he would be solely the most dangerous competition he would have in the exam besides perhaps the Uchiha whom was nowhere to be found. Naruto had spaced of the Senban chewing man's introduction to the exam, but knew he was going to be the first to fight. So he had one simple question, and the answer would tell him if he could go with his Plan A or Plan B strategy. In the Chunin exams after Lee's fight with Gaara, everyone had turned to look at Naruto as he asked his question. You would fix the stadium after previous battles. Are you going to be doing that here? The Senban chewing Jounin raised an eyebrow at Naruto's question and shrugged. Well, those preliminaries you guys had were a first-time thing. However, it is a rule for the finals in every village except for Iwagakure that the battlefield must remain the same. The 5 Kages when developing these exams felt it was necessary to keep the Chunin exam finals battlefield the same and force the possible future Chunins to show their ability to adapt to different situations. Naruto nodded to himself and continued to ignore the proctor of the exams that was essentially stating the same things that were said for the preliminaries. He spent his time looking around the stadium trying to find Mei, but much to his displeasure he couldn't find her. However, he did see his teammate Sakura in the stadium, and she gave him a wave when he looked at her. He assumed she was returning the favor for the fact that he cheered her on in the preliminaries. He doubted that she was just being genuinely nice. As big of a crush he had on her, he knew her better than that. She was rarely, if ever, genuinely nice to him. Uzumaki Naruto vs Hyuga Niji, the proctor called as he read their names off of a paper. Everyone else in the stadium save the most anticipated shinobi battle of the finals left the ring. This left both Niji and Naruto to get into position. Despite the hundreds of people in the stadium above them, when the proctor had called for the fight to start, the area was deathly silent. Naruto and Niji stood across from each other, either in direct striking distance. You could cut the tension with a knife, it was so thick. The small gusts of wind that flew through the stadium floor, kicking up bits of dust. Naruto began to back up to the wall, which caused Niji and several of the Hyugas in the stadium to smirk. A wise choice, to flee Uzumaki, Niji stated with a condescending smirk on his features. Naruto ignored the comment as he allowed Mei's words and practices over the past week to guide him as he pulled out a sealing scroll. I am going to make this battle so one-sided that you are going to look like a disgrace to the Hyuga family name, Naruto said in an even tone that mirrored Niji's, which got the stadium's attention. I told you, Naruto, that I was going to teach you so you can win this exam. If you have learned anything from my teachings, the one thing I want you to remember is that you utilize any advantage you can that could adhere your opponent. That is why the very first action you take in the exam is going to be creating the field your home. To make it so you always have the advantage no matter the situation. That is why this scroll will be your first step to victory. With that, Naruto stuck the sealing scroll into the Chunin exam wall, and unsealed the contents. Water flooded out of the scroll at rapid speeds, as if a dam had broken. The action surprised everyone in the exams, even more so than Naruto's new outfit. Niji looked on in mild surprise as Naruto continued to stand by the water that was flooding out of the scroll and quickly filling the Chunin exam floor. The shinobi that were on the ground floor when Naruto had asked his question about altering the stadium all had narrowed eyes. They never imagined anything like this when he asked the question. Any plans they were forming in their heads or had previously formed were completely changed now that the exam could very well turn into a battle on top of a lake. The majority of the shinobi in the exam were now all thinking about one thing: chakra. Sarutobi sighed as he held his head in his hand. Frustrated would be a nice way to describe how he was feeling. With all of the commotion around the village the past month about Niji and Naruto had certainly caused him problems. However, he wasn't even thinking about Naruto's encounters with Niji. It was whom Naruto was repeatedly seen with. A woman whom his shinobi reported to be dressed in blue most of the time and had auburn hair. At first he smiled when he heard the news. The thought that someone was giving the boy the time of day was a nice thought. The boy deserved some happiness. Yet as he continued to hear more and more about it, he started to look into it. He sent several shinobi to track the woman down and question her, yet she always seemed to evade any form of pursuit. However, they were all able to report her features but never her name. Sarutobi at that point took the time to take matters into his own hands. Yet once he felt the damage had already been done. He wished he took matters into his own hands earlier. If he had, perhaps he wouldn't be in this situation. Sarutobi paused his train of thought as both he and the Kazekage were staring down from the Kage box in mild surprise at Naruto's action. Sarutobi more so than the Kazekage. He had never expected Naruto to ever pull something like this for a tournament, but in general the concept was genius. At least until he thought back to the woman and scowled. This obviously wasn't the boy's plan. He could only grit his teeth as he continually visualized a woman with auburn hair, and could honestly only remember one woman that truly stood out amongst his memories in that regard. Sarutobi looked around with the eyesight akin to a hawk at all of his jounin, but particularly the jounin of the rookies as he observed Naruto's change to the battlefield. He could tell that their faces were trying to hold back some surprise of the boy's action. However, it was justly so. The boy had forever changed the exam for people and forced them to constantly be draining chakra. It wasn't that big of a deal for a Hokage to stand on water, of course not. Neither was it a big of a deal for Naruto, a Jinchuriki, to stand on water. Their chakra supplies were vast. However, Naruto could more than likely stand on top of the water all day with his reserves and not even feel winded. This was in contrast to the average shinobi with genin training. Well, number one, they very well may not even know how to stand on water in the first place since it is a chunin level practice. Number two, a genin could very well show signs of tiring after a mere 15 to 20 minutes on top of water. The thought that they would need to compete in several rounds doing this? It was a rather sinister, but intelligent way to secure oneself a position in the later matches. Sarutobi could only look on in amusement as Naruto got up from a crouch by the door, still across the field from Niji. He had presumably just got done blocking off any possible ways the water could leak out of the stadium. Quite the plan your Uzumaki Naruto has, the Kazekage said as he glanced over to Sarutobi. Sarutobi couldn't help but chuckle at the man's statement, if only he knew. He was about to respond to the Kazekage, until his problem decided to do so for him. Oh yes, I believe the tactics I taught the boy will work quite nicely on mere genin Kazekage-sama, a female voice said as she made her presence known. An Umbu launched into the room next to the Hokage. I'm sorry, Hokage-sama, I wanted to stop her, but the Mizukage insisted on gaining her seat in the Kage box as per the rules agreed upon for the Chunin exams by past Kages. The old Hokage gave the woman a bitter stare, while the Kazekage seemed to be silently seething at the situation. Sarutobi sighed and shook his head. Well, I am never one to deny a Kage their rightful seat, he said through gritted teeth as he stared at the blue Kage hat in the woman's hand. She was flanked by two guards, one wearing the signature Mist Hunter ninja mask, and the other being the famed youngest of the 7 shinobi swordsmen, Jojuro. Sarutobi sighed as he took in the woman's features, and most notably her auburn hair. He found Naruto-sensei, he just had a hard time truly believing it. He idly groaned at the fact that the Nidaime, his former sensei, had insisted upon every Kage being given the opportunity of having a seat in any Chunin exam if they so choose to have one. Long time no see, Hokage, the woman said in a cold tone as she sat in the seat she had been given for the exams. Mei Terumi, Sarutobi said quietly, but the woman quickly responded. I believe that is Mizukage to you, Hokage, she said, staring at the man intently with cold eyes. Sarutobi ignored the comment and said, I see it appears your side won the civil war then? He said with a hint of frustration. Why yes, we did win. Of course, this is with no thanks to you since you denied us any assistance in the war, Mei said quickly as she gazed down to the field. Sarutobi said nothing as he had long come to different conclusions as to why the woman was here. However, one of the key reasons he rationalized was to rub the fact that she became Kage without his country's help. Yet more importantly, he feared she was here for something more. Revenge. He pushed the thoughts from his mind as he stared back down at the now 30 to 40 foot deep lake of a stadium. Naruto stood on top of the water across from the Hyuga, whom was still waiting in a typical defensive stance. He had read in the library that they were renowned for their patience in battle, waiting for the opponent to attack, and for them to counter, and press the advantage. However, Naruto with his action of unsealing a lake had since put a deadline on the Hyuga's patience. I am perfectly content with standing on this lake all day. I promise you I have more chakra than you do, he yelled over to Niji, whom bristled a little at that. He had only practiced water walking a couple times in his shinobi career, and he didn't doubt the shadow clone making shinobi across from him had more chakra. He just knew that chakra meant nothing unless it was used efficiently. Sadly, playing the waiting game over a body of water was an efficient if not taxing way to utilize superior chakra reserves. Niji relented, realizing he only had a certain amount of time to finish this fight before he would lose, and began to make his way forward. Naruto grinned as Niji began to make his way to Naruto, and Naruto too made his way to the center, intent on meeting the Hyuga halfway. I am fated to win this match, Uzumaki, Niji said as they got within 30 feet of each other. Naruto grinned, for what you have done over these past 2 months. I will give you every ounce of sweat, every ounce of blood, you will get my absolute best in this battle, Niji, that is if you deserve it. Naruto said, this time looking at Niji as if the prodigy was not worthy of his absolute best. However, this action goaded the Hyuga into attacking, which was exactly what he wanted to have happen. Niji rushed forward into melee combat with Naruto, a place that the Hyuga typically dominate. Naruto was quick to backpedal, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. Niji struck forward with his right hand, aiming for a tenketsu in Naruto's bare right arm, which nearly hit, but only served to graze past his skin. That was the problem with the Hyuga fighting style. It wasn't nearly as damaging if the Hyuga couldn't hit the tenketsus effectively. So if Naruto merely was constantly moving around while Niji continued to press the advance, the chances of the Hyuga doing any damage significantly dropped. Your clan is arrogant, Niji! Naruto yelled as he dodged an attack aimed for a tenketsu just above his heart. To assume that your fighting style could never be used by someone not from your clan, he said, quickly avoiding a palm thrust directed toward his stomach. Niji followed into a spin, hoping to catch Naruto in the neck with his left hand. However, Naruto was quick to bring up his left gauntlet-clad arm to block the oncoming strike. He kicked forward quickly to Niji's abs, which was deflected with a palm strike down on top of Naruto's leg that caused him to grit his teeth in annoyance. Even the boy's blocks were offensive. Niji kept his momentum from pressing down Naruto's attack, and used it to do a full sweep to Naruto's legs. However, Naruto saw it coming, and this merely provided Naruto with the stepping stone he needed to reveal his technique. Naruto hadn't worked at all during the month on taijutsu, but Kenjutsu on the other hand. Naruto gave a vicious punch to Niji's jaw that sent him tumbling backwards as he hopped over the boy's leg sweep. Niji was sent back a good 10 feet, skipping across the water, which gave Naruto the time he needed to make a ridiculously long katana that allowed him to keep Niji at range. Sure, this typically wasn't the length of blade he practiced with, but the situation called for it. The action caught everyone's eye in the stadium. However, it wasn't the blade that caught their eyes, it was how it was made. You were able to teach the boy how to utilize water jutsus without a water source? Asked Sarutobi in extreme surprise as he looked down at Naruto with a blade in hand, and time seemed to slow for the old man as he couldn't help but see the Nidaime in Naruto due to the formerly unique technique being displayed in front of him. It was as if the man was seeing a ghost. The Mizukage stayed silent, but she couldn't help but smirk at the sight before her, and she leaned a bit forward in her chair to observe the battle better. She knew this match should be absolutely no challenge for Naruto, and couldn't help but feel a bit bad. After all of the hype that had been created across the village after Naruto's attack on Niji, they were going to be disappointed how one-sided this battle would surely turn out to be. Naruto had brought a sword to a fist fight. Naruto rushed forward, swinging the long sword forward, right where Niji was formerly crouched at, regaining his bearings. Many of the shinobi and spectators of the exam were impartial to this. However, the rookies that had known Naruto were extremely surprised by Naruto's actions. He was aiming to kill. Niji had rolled out of the way from Naruto at the last second, much to Naruto's displeasure. Niji realized that the dodging and rolling was forcing him to rapidly shift chakra to different areas of his body, making him waste even more chakra than he initially intended. However, he was in no position to bitch about it as Naruto gave in a quick underhanded swing from the right going up that would have taken Niji's head clean off if the boy hadn't ducked. Niji jumped back quickly to dodge another swing from Naruto that would have cleaved him directly in half from top to bottom, before he tried to close the distance and give a strike to Naruto's shoulder, intent on making the arm immobile. This action, however, wasn't going to fly with Naruto, whom quickly hit the incoming arm down with his free gauntlet-encased hand before following up with a backhanded uppercut to the Hyuga that sent the boy sprawling once again across the water. Naruto this time wasn't going to take the time to make the water blade and give Niji time to recover. He pressed his advance with the currently one-sided fight. Naruto became the poster child of bringing a sword to a fist fight to everyone in the exam. Naruto rushed up, not allowing Niji to recover, and grabbed him by the neck with his gauntlet, and proceeded to toss him roughly into the air, just enough so the boy wouldn't be given the opportunity to try and roll off to side again. After all, you can't dodge in mid-air. Naruto suffered an attempted tenketsu strike, but it was effectively useless on the metal arm. He gave a slash to the right which could have very well slashed through Niji's ribs. How Niji was quick to bat the oncoming blade over his head, much to Naruto's surprise. He had forgotten the one-sided battle that the water sword, like any blade, could be parried by a well-timed strike on its flat side. Niji came back to the ground only to be forced to dodge several stabs. They came at him in a flurry from all directions that got the crowd roaring. Left side of the head. Right side of the head. Narrowly missing his left shoulder. Nearly piercing his throat. Now the blows were quite easy for Niji to dodge, having practiced the gentle fist all of his life. Yet the situation he was in was constantly going downhill, like playing with fire. When you play with fire, sooner or later you are going to get burned. Niji got burned. A quick change from stabbing to a single slash across the chest caused Niji to double over in pain, which Naruto only proved to capitalize on like any true warrior would, and gave him a near jaw-shattering knee that packed an enormous amount of strength behind it. It sent Neji flying backwards, nearly hitting the wall, and that was when Naruto revealed his personal jutsu. 6 small foxes made of water shot quickly out of the water, and if you stared intently out of the water, you would see that there were even more running around under the surface. The foxes rushed Neji, whom despite his wound was able to quickly hit the 2 that attempted to pounce him out of the air. The problem was that the foxes appeared to be never-ending. He would destroy 2, and they would merely turn back into water like Mizu Bunshins. Add to the fact that every one he killed 3 more would seemingly come out of the water from the end of the arena, and eventually begin to once again leap at the Hyuga. Soon enough Neji was forced to reveal his family's technique, the Kaiten. The swirling deflective sphere of chakra ripped 2 foxes that charged at him to shreds, and served to make a thick mix of water and water-saturated chakra in the area. Neji was nowhere to be seen. Naruto held up his blade defensively, peering through the mist for the Hyuga, whom had really no place to hide, and yet was doing quite a good job of hiding in the mist. It felt like hours to Naruto that Neji was in hiding, when it could have really been mere seconds. There was the deafening roar of the crowd that was screwing with his sense of sound, something that didn't make him any more comfortable with the situation. Naruto, eventually fed up with waiting for Neji to come out of the mist, quickly manipulated the water in it, and forced it to melt back into the water lake below. Now in the shinobi world, time is everything. A second early or a second late could be the difference between life and death. So when Naruto had dissipated the mist and found only the large empty scroll he had used to fill the stadium up with water laying where Neji was kicked into the mist. It was by sheer luck that Naruto spun around, blade poised outward, realizing the Hyuga prodigy had used a replacement jutsu with the scroll on the wall, and attempted to flank him when he could barely hear because of the crowd's obnoxious roaring. Neji had taken a leap, likely intent of delivering a palm thrust to the back of Naruto's head, an action that would have surely killed him, or at least put him in the hospital for an extended period of time. The only fault in his plan was when he turned around and there was Naruto with a near 8-foot skewer of a blade there, for him to just skewer himself on. Luckily the blade had merely struck the boy through the stomach and not the heart, so the match was instantly called by the proctor. The silence that had occurred when Naruto's blade skewered Neji only lasted mere seconds before loud cheering from everyone in the stadium, like bloodthirsty animals, or idiots watching something akin to dog fights. Well, everyone save the Hyuga section. Naruto noticed the children his age didn't agree with what happened and how the battle ended, but Naruto didn't care. Hell, people were cheering Uzumaki. Uzumaki. Over and over. Acknowledgement over friendship for the time being was what was on Naruto's mind. A medic came up to Naruto, whom Naruto briefly explained that they would just need to channel chakra into the blade to keep its form, since he already had done the shape manipulation for it. However, if the blade no longer had chakra coursing through it, it would merely dissolve into water. Anyone with half a brain would know why the blade dissolving before they had adequate means of helping the boy would be terribly bad. Up in the Kage box, Mei could barely contain her grin, an action that didn't go unnoticed by the Hokage or the Kazekage. She promptly excused herself, stating calmly that she was going to go congratulate her student. Sarutobi remained silent but couldn't help feel a level of hatred he hadn't felt in a long time over the woman stating that Naruto was her student. He suddenly felt like cursing the fact that he ever signed Kakashi off to go take Sasuke to go train so he didn't get utterly slaughtered by this Gaara boy. Perhaps if he didn't, Naruto wouldn't have been so ruthless. He knew that he failed the boy since he was likely clinging to the woman like glue. So trying to find a way to remedy the situation was, needless to say, tough. He only wished that Jiraiya had actually tried to find the boy, seeing as the man was currently in town. It fell on his own fault that Naruto had gained a teacher, quite possibly the best teacher alive from the land of the Bloody Mist. Moments after the woman had left, an Umbu appeared and said, "Sir Uchiha Sasuke still isn't present for his match with Gaara. I believe we can always move their match back a bit, isn't that right, Hokage-sama?" the Kazekage asked with a questioning glance. Sarutobi sighed as he ran a hand through his gray hair. He needed another successor so he didn't have to make these decisions anymore. Naruto sighed as he made his way back up the stairs to the waiting room for contestants in the exam. He knew he probably wasn't the most well-liked person amongst the contestants after he completely reshaped the playing field. However, it was just something they were going to have to deal with now, unless they want to try and dive down 40 feet, leaving themselves open to attack. Sure enough, when he had made his way up the stairs, there were several glares shot his way, which he ignored. He was prepared for it anyways. He made his way over to the railing next to Shikamaru and Shino with a grin. "So how did I do?" Naruto asked in amusement, knowing full and well that despite the challenge Neji could have posed, Naruto had the perfect defense and offense to use against the boy. Forcing him into a situation where his own skill set was rendered ineffective lest he wanted to take the chance of getting his arm cut off by a blade in the way. Add to the fact that if Niji tried to stall, he would merely waste his chakra and be forced to give up before he passed out in the water. I thought you overworked it, Shino said calmly, much to Shikamaru's amusement as the bug user continued to stare out into the stadium, not even turning to address Naruto. Naruto scowled at Shino's statement. Despite trying to change his personality a bit at Mei's request and not letting his emotions get a hold of him, Naruto scoffed. Overworked it. Damn it, he finished with a mumble as he kicked the railing he was resting on with a frown on his face. Well, I believe you were quite entertaining, Naruto-kun. A female voice which caused Naruto and the rest of the room to turn and acknowledge the newfound presence. Mei-sensei. Naruto nearly yelled with a grin as he quickly walked up and gave the woman a hug, seemingly not taking in the woman's appearance. However, that was not to say that everyone else in the room hadn't taken in her appearance. Temari of the Sand was the first to voice the opinions of everyone else in the room with just one word, sensei. Mei smiled lightly and pulled Naruto to her with her free hand and ran a hand through his hair. I'm hurt, Naruto. You haven't noticed anything different about me. Naruto promptly took a step back, flushed slightly in embarrassment at missing something different about his sensei of the past month. That was when he took the woman in. It was hard to believe, but she looked far more beautiful now with well-fashioned blue shinobi garments with the mist symbol hanging on them. She was distracting if Naruto was honest with himself. However, for some reason he felt that was Mei's intention with her current look, to be distractingly beautiful. Yet the final thing Naruto rested his eyes on was the hat in her hand. The hat that looked a lot like the Hokage hat but blue with the water symbol on it. It suddenly dawned on him. All of those times she refused to tell him her rank. All of the times she addressed the shinobi of the mist as her shinobi. Naruto realized he was not just staring face to face with the first person that truly gave him the time of day. The first person that trained him and prepared him for this tournament. No, he was standing face to face with one of the 5 Kages. Renowned as one of the most powerful people in the world. So naturally, upon finding out about this, Naruto's intelligent reply was simple. What? Mei laughed. Mei had gone back up to the Kage box now after small congratulations and a kiss on the cheek, leaving a severely flustered Naruto behind. Naruto had since been getting teased by Shikamaru about how big of an idiot he was for not realizing he was being trained by the Mizukage. However, Naruto doubted the lazy boy even knew that she was the Mizukage until she appeared dressed like that. Much to his displeasure, even Temari of the Sand continued to talk quite loudly about the idiot whom didn't know he was being trained by the Mizukage. Then going on to saying that he merely beat Niji with luck, and played the boy's overconfidence. Perhaps it was psychological warfare, but it was working. However, the deepest blow he received was from Shino, whom simply stated, as expected from Uzumaki Naruto. The comment made him scowl. Shino was often calm, quiet, and reserved. However, when he did speak, it was usually directly in regards to the situation at hand. The open-ended comment that could very well be an insult made Naruto grit his teeth. However, instead of getting even more flustered than he already was with Mei's earlier teasing of his shell-shocked form. The matches that had happened since Naruto's were well annoying to say the least. That was because Kankuro was here standing in the contestant box, yet he forfeited before he even made his way onto the floor. Shikamaru and Temari both had a rather intellectually pleasing match that ended in a clear win for Shikamaru, at which point where he gave up. Although he couldn't complain, Mei had taught him to win this tournament, and that was why he was so excited to be fighting once again, even if it was against this Gaara character. Naruto stood across from the red-headed shinobi with a grin on his face. I have just a plan to deal with him, he thought with calmly as he went over the rather basic but effective battle strategy that both he and Mei were able to cook up when Naruto revealed to her the boy's abilities. The proctor looked up to the Kage box wondering if they really wanted to go through with this fight. Originally, many people had wanted to see Sasuke fight Gaara, and it was one of the reasons the boys' match was delayed in the first place. Yet then again, the crowd did seem rather pumped at the prospect of the underdog's one-sided victory over Niji. It showed that even one perceived by others as an idiot could still achieve greatness with hard work. If the proctor was honest with himself, he would have compared the fight to that of Jiraiya versus Orochimaru. The idiot trumping the genius through hard work. He was quite interested now in seeing the hard-working boy whom beat the genius go up against the seemingly unbeatable. Although it all came down to the no 3 Kages in the Kage box. I am sorry, Kazekage, but I will not extend Uchiha Sasuke's time any further. Especially when he is already hours late, and the Mizukage is wanting to witness Naruto face Gaara. On top of the fact that I can't force Temari to go battle against Aburame Shino after having just battled. It is already unfair that I am even requesting Naruto to face your genin, whom still hasn't fought yet. Well, Hokage, I would agree if it weren't for the fact that many of the officials of several different countries have come to witness the last Uchiha face-off against Tsuna's Gaara. Perhaps we can give the Uchiha a 15-minute grace period? the Kazekage said calmly. The Mizukage decided to comment on the situation with a warm smile. Well, as I am sure it has been discussed by you already while I was gone. Any shinobi that is going to arrive late for the exam doesn't deserve to become a chunin anyways. However, if the crowd really wants to see the battle between those two genin, then by all means offer them a chance to fight after the tournament. I, however, am here to witness Uzumaki win this tournament altogether, and am not going to sit through blatant favoritism to a failure of a shinobi. The Mizukage's harsh words gained her a look from both the Hokage and the Kazekage. Are you insulting my shinobi forces, Mizukage? Sarutobi said calmly, yet the intensity in his stare was that of an old war expert. The Mizukage, to her credit, was unaffected by the stare and said, No, I am not insulting your shinobi forces, Hokage. I am merely insulting two of your shinobi that are not only wasting my time, but they are wasting everyone else's time. Their tardiness without disciplinary action being taken is only setting an example to all of the people in the stadium that you are unwilling to punish those that break the rules. However, not only that, but reward them by giving them the honor to participate in the exams despite their tardiness and forcing everyone to wait for them. May could have gone on with her statement. Yet the softening of the Hokage's eyes as her statement continued caused her to stop. Sarutobi sighed. My apologies, Kazekage, he said before standing up and giving the proctor the go-ahead to start the match between Naruto and Gaara. Hajime. It was a sound that rang calmly through the ears of the two boys on the field. Sand launched out of Gaara's gourd and began to float in the air around the boy. Naruto knew this was a fight that he would need to be significantly more cautious with, seeing as how the boy could very well be just a cold-blooded killer. As such, with such a dangerous opponent, Naruto was this time around quick to start. Remember, Naruto, your opponent uses sand as his primary attacking force. He likely channels chakra through the sand to make it move to his will. However, like your ability to pull water out of the air, this sand manipulation must require a vast amount of chakra to keep up. The faster he has to force the sand to move, the more chakra he uses. Now imagine if the boy had to constantly move the sand in order to keep it dry. Mei's voice echoed in Naruto's head. Why would he have to keep the sand dry? Naruto remembered his question vividly, and he could remember her simple response. Because he has to. Naruto had a good 20 water clones come out in rapid succession, and having them charge at the sand in case Suna shinobi. The redhead made no effort to move and merely brought up his standard shield of sand, with a relatively bored expression on his face. The boy would regret not taking Naruto seriously. Naruto was going to make sure of that. Typically, Naruto would call someone on their overconfidence, and say that he would make them regret it, but honestly? Why warn them? If they were dumb enough to not question their own mortality, and rely on the presumed invulnerability, then he would gladly tear them to pieces. The clones circled Gaara and jumped at him from all sides, at which Gaara simply made a clone of sand out of the sand already floating outside of the gourd. The sand clone then proceeded to send a single whip of sand around in a circle, forcing all of the water clones to turn back to water. The sand in true ultimate defense form blocked every single drop of water that could have landed on the boy. This, however, did in fact tell Naruto something that he wasn't completely sure of before, despite the boy's fight with Lee. The sand was a fully automatic defense. Why else would Gaara feel necessary to catch literally every drop of water in the sand? Naruto summoned his water sword as well as a relatively large group of water foxes. There were at least a good 30 or 40 of them. Although many of the people in the crowd wanted to slap their hands against their foreheads at the display. After the previous display with water clones, it seemed almost idiotic to try a different tactic with a bunch of smaller version of water clones. The foxes ran in first, followed by Naruto, whom was going through a short selection of hand seals as he glided across the water's surface at impressive speeds. The foxes all charged, some even rising out of the water behind the redhead. Yet they were no match for his ultimate defense. The foxes would leap and try to get the boy with a vicious bite, only to be forced into water and be soaked up by the sand. Naruto appeared in front of the clone with his blade drawn, slashing repeatedly at the sand clone of Gaara. This action, however, got many questioning glances of everyone in the crowd. What the hell is Naruto doing? Ino drawled as she supported her head with one arm in a bored fashion. They had all since moved up to the railing since it was one of the rookie genin fighting the most dangerous opponent in the exams. It does seem pretty useless, doesn't it? Sakura asked with the slightest tick mark growing, for a moment forgetting all about Sasuke not being at the exams yet. Duh forehead, his sword keeps breaking every time it hits the sand. What is he going to do? Hope the Gaara kid freezes to death from being wet. Naruto, while remaining in front, slashing at the clone constantly, the blade dispersing every time it made contact, splashing water onto the clone. Every now and then, however, Gaara would send an actual attack at made of sand, which he would actually deflect, and oddly enough the sword would hold. To Gaara this only meant one thing. He narrowed his eyes at the thought the boy is doing this on purpose. The chest of the sand clone exploded outward, moving considerably more slow than what people had seen it move during the preliminary rounds. Realization hit Gaara and he suppressed a scowl. His mother may be whispering in his head telling him to kill the blonde boy, but he knew a disadvantage when he saw one. The water had saturated the sand, and made it heavier without Gaara noticing since he wasn't actively moving it around. The sand was moving slower due to all of the water in it. Gaara toyed with the idea of dispersing his sand, and forcing all of the water out of it. Yet he couldn't help but feel that was what Uzumaki Naruto wanted. He wanted him to force the water out of the sand by dispersing it, and the action would then leave him open to attack with minimal amounts of dry sand to defend himself with. If only I could dash. Gaara was forced to stop his train of thought as he didn't notice four tiny spiraling pools of water form around him during Naruto's frontal assault. The giant spiraling fangs came quickly out of the water and started grinding into Gaara's sand like a drill from all sides but the front. Gaara grit his teeth at his current predicament. No matter, he thought dryly. Mother will have your blood eventually. Gaara formed the halo of a sand cloud around his person and began moving forward, out of the oncoming barrage of water. This action mildly surprised the sand siblings in the contestants' box. Gaara hadn't even really needed to move during a battle, but just because their brother was walking wasn't anything to get excited over. However, it was noteworthy. Naruto inwardly grinned at the sight of Gaara taking steps forward to get out of the water Fang bullet barrage. By the time the redhead had gotten out of the barrage, his sand was literally dripping wet, and Naruto's full plan was finally realized. How will we force him to keep his sand moving and dry though? Lee was super fast, and Gaara didn't even need to move in order to stop him. Naruto remembered his question. If he doesn't keep it moving, Naruto, he will lose his sand. Naruto charged forward with his water sword that was once again the length of an absurdly large 10-foot katana. He had pumped enough chakra in there in order for it to stay intact for a good 10 seconds after it had been thrown. However, in Naruto's case, he would probably only need 3. 1. Gaara's sand shield loyally came up to block and catch the water sword Naruto had thrown. 2. Naruto jumped up towards Gaara, making 2 hand seals before extending his hand. 3. Lightning shot out in several streams of Naruto's hand and fingers. Lightning coursed through the water sword that was sticking out of the dripping wet sand that was floating off the ground. From the entry point where the lightning struck, the sand flash heated far past its melting point. Remember, Naruto, the main mineral in desert sand, has a melting temperature of 4,200 degrees Fahrenheit and 2,300 C. I had you learn that basic lightning jutsu for a reason. After all, typical lightning is around the temperature of 52,000 degrees, and for people not in America, around 30,000 C, I think. The sand literally turned impossible to control. Between whatever substance the sand had turned into, Naruto knew the Sandman could no longer use it. Whether it became liquid glass that would instantly harden upon hitting the water, or if it was solid glass and was already prepared to fall to the depths of the man-made lake. It didn't mean much to Naruto. It just meant that the redhead no longer had anything that he could attack with. Naruto stood across from the redhead, and they stared at each other in silence. The crowd too, despite the impressive and quite surprising outcome of the situation, had turned silent. 2 boys stood across from each other, and yet one had effectively lost. At least that was what everyone thought. Naruto waited momentarily, hoping the boy would give up. Yet upon his opponent slipping into a relatively sloppy fighting stance that appeared to be that which one would practice in the academy, he realized that the boy was not going to give up. Naruto gathered another water sword out of virtually thin air, with the slightest bits of the blade being made from the watery surface below his feet. Naruto calmly walked forward, no longer intent on having his sword dissipate when coming in contact with the boy's sand shield, seeing as how he had no more to worry about. He could now just chop the boy up as he uses that pathetic excuse for a taijutsu stance. Naruto ran at the boy, intent on cleaving the boy in half, seeing as how he wasn't ready to give up. Naruto jumped at the last several feet and swung down hard on the boy's arm only for the blade to stop. That was when he heard it, "Run, Naruto-kun." He still had the sand that encases his body. Was the cry of, oddly enough, Lee from Guy's team. Time seemed to slow for everyone in the stadium, because by the time Naruto had heard Lee's yell it was too late. Sand had gathered and protruded a spike directly from his chest that pierced right through Naruto's stomach and hefted him off the ground. Naruto, despite his grim situation, couldn't help but grin at the irony of the final moments of the battle. He told himself he was going to tear Gaara apart for being overconfident. Then here he is quite possibly about to be destroyed due to his own overconfidence. Naruto looked down upon the redhead, whose face now held a crazed expression, and he bit back a scowl. He was fully intent with wiping that expression off the boy's face by the end of the match. So he clasped his hands together in a single abbreviated seal, and uttered 3 words. Water Dragon Jutsu. A giant water dragon burst forth from the water, diving right into Gaara. Naruto was forced to take some collateral damage due to the sheer size of the dragon. However, the damage dealt to Naruto was far less than that which was dealt to Gaara, seeing as how he was hoisted several feet above the boy. Not to mention the fact that his body was actually used to taking physical punishment and recovering quickly. As Gaara was swept away by the dragon, the clean but sharp spike was removed from Naruto's stomach. He could feel the wound stitching up on the spot. One of the few times he was thankful for the fox. It gave him the opportunity to not be punished so severely when mistakes were made. Needless to say, when the water dragon, whom seemingly had a mind of its own, was done punishing Gaara, the proctor didn't know whom to call the winner. The red-headed boy who was staring blankly, yet breathing and awake, at the sun? Or the water user that was kneeling in the corner clutching his stomach? I guess I shall call this match AT. The proctor, Genma, was cut off by Naruto quickly yelling, "No! I can fight," he said as he stood up on shaken legs clutching his stomach. He took a deep breath of air before spitting out a glob of blood and repeated what Mei had told him in his head. You should be proud to be a Jinchuriki, Naruto-kun. More importantly, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. You have the potential to become the greatest shinobi the world has seen in the past few hundred years. Your abilities related to Kyuubi are nothing to be ashamed of. He took his hand off of his now sealing wound. I will kill him, however, if the match isn't called in my favor, Naruto said with as calm a tone as possible. Despite himself healing, he still wanted to at least be able to sit down and rest while he recovered. Genma chewed on his samban for a few moments, studying the red head whom laid in the water. He was beginning to appear less and less aware of his surroundings as time went on. Soon enough, Genma, with quite the smirk, relented. Alright then. It appears this match goes to Uzumaki Naruto of the Leaf, he yelled out, at which point the majority of the stadium cheered. Save the few that came from Suna, whom merely sat there rather disgruntled, likely because the lost a bet saying that Gaara would win all of his matches. They didn't take into account that there could have been more than one person that was obvious competition for Gaara. A majority of the Jounins and Chunins, however, were noticing a pattern in Naruto's performances in the fights he has had in the Chunin exams. Each one thus far had been rather well planned given the circumstances. Keeping a Hyuga inside a theorized dead zone, which consisted of keeping a Hyuga around 6 to 9 feet away from you at all times. Too close to attempt to use any of their few long-ranged attacks, or their heavenly spin. Yet too far for them to get any decent strikes on the opponent. Or with the most recent match, playing his opponent's overconfidence. The boy acted as if he was immortal and that no one in the exams could oppose him, even when Naruto was his opponent. His cockiness led to his demise. Utilizing actual chemistry and science coupled with a rather effective strategy to beat an opponent. Uzumaki Naruto may have yet to show the teamwork that the Hokage looked for in Chunins. However, the boy had certainly shown his ability to plan and analyze situations and prepare. His idea of changing the battlefield to best suit him was an old mentality, one that became personified in the Shinobi Wars by the salamander Hanzo. The man had turned his entire village into a battlefield that directly supported his strategic needs. He could oppose any and every threat, even Konoha's legendary Sannin, all at once. The thought of a genin pulling tactics like that out of a hat, well, needless to say, many were impressed, even if they weren't showing it. After Naruto had been declared the winner of the match, he fell once again to a kneel as he grit his teeth. He could only thank Kami that Mei had decided to materialize right in front of him with a water shunshin and assist him in standing. She walked with him several paces, both of them giving a nod to a surprised Genma as they walked past. He promptly gave Naruto a light pat on the shoulder, at which point Naruto would have gave a cheesy grin at the acknowledgement, and run around yelling about it if even the mere thought of the action didn't hurt the boy's stomach. A loud rustling was heard behind them as Naruto limped his way off of the stadium lake. Naruto wanted to know what type of joke Kami was trying to pull with having Sasuke arrive just as Naruto was the most injured he had been the entire day. The concept would probably swell his rival's ego, a thought that only made Naruto scowl. Naruto! He heard his sensei call in surprise as he looked around the stadium, and took in his student's appearance. Naruto grit his teeth and turned around. There were few people he could say he honestly held a heavy dislike for, and this man was one of them. The only bright thing that came to mind was the prospect that Kakashi's betrayal against him led him to find Mei, whom happened to be a far better sensei than he could have ever hoped for. His success thus far only proved that. Kakashi's single visible eye widened momentarily as he took in Naruto's battered appearance, and more specifically, the hole in his gut. Yeah? Naruto replied with one eye open as he shifted the hand covering his stomach. Kakashi didn't know what to say at Naruto's current state of injury. The current state of injury reminded him of someone else he failed. How did your match go?" he asked, giving a weak-eye smile as he did his best to look past the grim situation. Naruto growled to himself, and felt like lashing out at the man, but didn't by merely walking over to Gaara's fallen form. "I handled them," he said calmly as he stepped off Gaara and looking around. It appeared that his siblings didn't exactly feel comfortable with the prospect of touching the boy and carrying him back up to the contestant's box. Luckily, at least in Naruto's opinion, Kakashi's attention had shifted. When he saw Gaara's fallen form, he instantly knew what had happened. "I knew we had a flashy entry, but is Sasuke disqualified?" Genma sighed. "Your tardiness is contagious at Kakashi? However, I'm afraid so. Sasuke was disqualified, which forced Naruto to face whom would have been Sasuke's opponent. The Hokage has agreed that if when all of the matches are finally finished, if Sasuke wishes to challenge someone, most likely Gaara of the desert, then they will be allowed to do so." Although Genma began as he looked over to Gaara's fallen form, with Naruto eliminating the boy's sand, and then hitting him with a water dragon full force, "I am pretty sure he will be out of it for a while." The information that was just passed on to Kakashi made his eyes widen. A water dragon? Eliminating the boy's sand? He looked over to Naruto with newfound surprise and suddenly got the opportunity to take in just whom was crouched down next to the boy. At first glance it was just a young beautiful auburn-haired woman dressed in blue. However, when his eyes glanced to the hat in her hand, he suddenly realized just whom Naruto must have gotten to train him when he had taken Sasuke for the month. Naruto knelt down next to Gaara with Mei at his side and said, "I am going to carry him up to his team." Mei raised an eyebrow at the action. She wasn't particularly against it. It just really wasn't one of the things she was hoping for the boy to develop a habit of. "You do know shinobi typically never show mercy?" she asked calmly. Naruto sighed and gave a shrug of his shoulders. "Not everyone was raised in the bloody mist like you and Zabuza." Mei couldn't help but flinch at Naruto's comment, but chose not to take the conversation any further. There was more than enough time to talk about things when the boy didn't have a gaping wound in his stomach and insisting that he carry another boy up several flights of stairs. Naruto hefted the immobile Gaara onto his shoulder and proceeded up the stairs. Mei moved to take the boy out of Naruto's arms, but Naruto quickly shrugged her off and told her he had the boy. This act of kindness didn't go unnoticed by many of the Suna shinobi that resided in the stadium. Most of them felt a sudden pang of guilt at the thought that all of them were too scared to go assist one of their own, that they literally had to have their enemy assist the boy. Upon reaching the top of the stairs, with Mei at his side, Naruto gave a heavy sigh as the wound was now visibly starting to stitch up the muscles the sand spear has damaged. He hefted Gaara off of his shoulders and carried him bridal style over to his sister before passing the boy off to her, whom was slightly reluctant to take him. Temari regardless nodded her thanks for bringing her Gaara, but on the inside her mind was stuck on something else. The signal wasn't given during Naruto's battle with Gaara, and now Gaara was in no fighting condition at all. Was there even going to be a signal given now? Naruto and Mei walked along the ring of the stadium at a slow pace. He had since draped his arm over Mei's shoulder, whom was currently bent down a bit to adjust to the boy's height. Mei, however, did have several thoughts on her mind as she walked along the stadium with Naruto. He had formerly been ostracized by everyone. Yet now with his success, there were countless people coming up to them as they made their way around the arena. However, the congratulations he was receiving wasn't the attention that bothered the woman. It was the more disturbing proposals of the older girls, and some grown women coming up to the boy and blatantly offering themselves up to Naruto. Now the typical guy, this wouldn't really be a problem. They would either use the woman and leave them, or just not use them at all. They would never stick around with a woman that would throw themselves at someone. Yet Naruto was a special case. With never having such attention before, Mei knew that Naruto may very well cling to the attention he was currently receiving, and that of course annoyed her to no end. She wished that the boy could be slightly normal, at least on the personality and emotional spectrum. Oh well, no matter, she thought to herself silently as she shifted positions with Naruto so that instead of he being the one walking next to the fans, it was her. If women were going to be throwing their affection at Naruto, she could just play that game too. After all, she only knew one person more manipulative than her, and she learned from the best. "Naruto," she said slowly as she gently pressed him closer to her. "These girls are awfully cute. Do you think any of them may become your girlfriend?" she said as she gestured to several of the civilian girls in the stands getting a bit red in the face as they spot Naruto. Mei resisted an urge to scowl as she thought over what she knew about attraction psychology. It was depressing. There were a few things that turned women on at a subconscious level that most men didn't even know about. It was honestly a checklist that went back to when humans were just a bunch of chakraless monkeys walking around with weapons made of rocks and sticks. The funny thing in her opinion was how generic the indicators were. To be able to defend your loved ones. To be pre-selected by women? To be a leader of men? To be emotionally wired correctly? The simplest of indicators that lead a male to be perceived above all of the other men in the surrounding. Naruto's fight showed all of the women that he was capable of defending people he cared about, that he had to have been a leader with how easily he dominated his opponents. It only took a few women around the stadium to say that the boy was cute and be interested in him before sure enough everyone was. Mei knew it didn't help that she had her arm around the boy. That likely set off many females in the arena. Yet alas, she wasn't trying to give herself a psychology lesson on alpha male characteristics. She already knew that the human body has base instincts similar to that of a dog. The problem was that Naruto currently represented an alpha male, and she needed to crush any pathetic girl that could come up and give Naruto a reason to stay in the village. Oh, I don't know, I mean they are pretty, but I saw Naruto began with a frown on his face but was cut off by Mei. But what about me, Naruto-kun? Am I not good enough for you? She said with the slightest pout and loosened her close contact with Naruto. She knew by how the boy instantly tensed at the lack of contact, he would be quick to try and redeem himself. No. Hey, he said, waving one arm a bit too frantically for his injury. That isn't it, I just didn't think you He couldn't find the right words to say to the woman beside him, which only caused her to smile in amusement. She knelt down next to Naruto, whom was resting his arm on the railing. How about this, Naruto? If you win this tournament, we can have a date? She said as she looked over his wound carefully to make sure that he would indeed be alright to fight in the tournament. Naruto, like the typical teenager that had been asked by a beautiful woman to go on a date, tried to make sense of the situation quickly in his head, and his face contorting in mild confusion only served to amuse Mei even further. Perhaps if he were a bit older she wouldn't be doing this solely for her own needs. Great, then it is settled, it's a date. She said quickly, not giving the boy time to rationalize as to why he shouldn't go on a date with her. Naruto blushed heavily and quickly said, Wait, but you don't think I'm too young for you? Mei raised an eyebrow at the statement, and was slightly impressed with the boy's quick choice of words. Instead of him asking if she thought she was too old for him, it was if she thought he was too young for her. Realistically the same question, just worded in a way that would prevent the boy from getting outright slapped. At least I have been teaching him things outside of basic ninjutsu, she thought to herself with a weak smile as she stood up. Naruto-kun, age for a shinobi is nothing but a number, she said as she knelt down and kissed the boy on the forehead. Naruto blushed and looked up towards Mei after the kiss. However, she was busy scanning the surrounding area for something he could not place. Of course, Mei on the other hand was inwardly smiling to herself. The looks on all of the women in the surrounding area made her heart melt. They had all given up any pursuit for the boy. She could only hope it would stay like that from now on. She couldn't have the boy creating reasons to stay in the village when she was so close to departure. Naruto rubbed his eyes as he approached his team from a distance with Mei alongside him. He could see from where he was already that the majority of the group was fussing over Sasuke. Amongst them was Guy and Lee, whom Naruto could only presume that they arrived later in the day because he hadn't seen him earlier when he was fighting Neji. He had only heard Lee briefly in his fight with Gaara. Then there were the people he had been seeing throughout the day, which were Kurenai, Asuma, Sakura, Chuji and Ino. He was slightly surprised to see Shikamaru join the group, but figured that after he had given up, the boy likely wouldn't have wanted to hang around the blonde from Suna. Sasuke and Kakashi must have gotten to the group merely moments before Naruto, and Mei, seeing as how they were still saying their hellos to everyone. Especially with how things were going down on the battlefield, the girl wasn't willing to give Shino an inch like she presumably did in her fight with Shikamaru. There was one thing he felt that was necessary to note though about her performance. She was sticking to the wall, and not standing on the water. It either meant she was playing a tactical move that would conserve more chakra, and he knew that it wasn't that far of a stretch considering her match with Shikamaru. Or she didn't know water walking, which also wasn't that hard to imagine given the fact that there wasn't many places to train water walking out in a desert. He was sure about one thing though, the girl must have impressive chakra control water walking or not because of the way she was able to manipulate the winds from her fan. The fight down on the Chunin exam lake was one-sided to say the least. A lot of fights had been one-sided in these exams, particularly Naruto's fight against Neji. However, this one took the cake of one-sided fights. Despite Shino's calm exterior, the bug user must have been annoyed. There was no way for him to combat against the Wind Mistress with his typical methods of attacking. The bugs would come out and try to crawl on the walls, or fly towards her with no real point. The bugs would instantly get blasted away by a large gust of wind, and he had a feeling that the girl was merely stalling and waiting for an opportune moment to really strike. Naruto sighed and could thank heaven that both Ino and Sakura had stood up and gone to greet Sasuke. This gave Naruto the opportunity to just crash down into the chairs they vacated, thoroughly surprising Chuji and Shikamaru, whom sat on the ground a foot or so next to his friend. Mei had promptly sat down next to Naruto in the free seat, but her presence alone was quick to draw attention of everyone nearby in the stands. Is that the Mizukage? Who is that beauty? Do you think she is taken? Does anyone know her name? The whispers began to give Naruto a headache as he leaned back in his chair and said, "You are distractingly beautiful, Mei." He was too tired to even add on any suffix to her name, and just focused on breathing in and out, waiting for the pain in his gut to subside. After the long walk around the stadium, he wasn't in the mood for doing much. Despite it being nearly fully stitched up, it still hurt like hell. Which was why he was surprised, but also immensely happy that Mei had moved her hands over his stomach and began to heal and massage the wound with medical chakra. Of course, he would never let her see that he was immensely happy. "Thanks, Mei," he said as he leaned back in his chair. Mei looked slightly amused at the boy's relaxed form and pinched his leg, causing him to jump. "You still have one more match to go before you can relax, Naruto. Get your head in the game and think of a plan to beat the girl from Suna, since it is obvious that she is going to win this match." The woman's tone of speaking instantly gathered the attention of the other people in the area, but particularly the Jounin and Naruto's team. "Naruto!" Sakura yelled with more excitement than she had ever shown her blonde teammate in her life. She ran up to him from where she was standing moments ago talking to Sasuke and gave the boy a hug. This action only caused him to hiss in pain. "Sakura, my stomach," Naruto said through gritted teeth and one eye open. The pink-haired girl looked down to what Naruto was talking about and upon regular circumstances likely would have thrown up. However, as Mei moved her hands momentarily to give the girl the view of his stomach, she was utterly surprised to see little strings of muscle tissue seemingly moving like worms and connecting to other strings before sealing up. She had only caught the last few moments of the closing of the wound as fresh skin began to make its presence known and finished the closing of Naruto's stomach. The result was perfect skin and abs once again without even so much as a scar. A good 7 yards away, Kakashi was speaking to Guy, Kurenai, and Asuma. "Just who is this woman, and how did Naruto find her?" Guy hit his fist into his palm as if he was thinking, "Well, my eternal rival, it appears that this woman is the Mizukage." This statement naturally caused the gathered shinobi to sweat drop. Even the civilians could realize that she was the Mizukage. Thankfully, before Kakashi could bring up a rather insulting retort to Guy's attempt at being helpful, Kurenai cut in. "We don't know. She had been seen several times by our teams walking around the village with Naruto. However, when she was walking around the village, she was just dressed in blue rags. We didn't think anything of it other than someone was just showing the boy kindness. I don't know about you, but I wasn't going to approach the two of them and be the potential reason for the woman suddenly leaving and no longer spending time with Uzumaki," Kurenai said as she sized up the woman before them who had since stopped working on Naruto's wound. She didn't seem bad. All of the genin had gathered around Naruto now, even Sasuke, whom stood at the back of the group. She could only imagine the boy was rather annoyed that Kakashi's chronic tardiness forced him to be disqualified. The girls in particular were asking repeated questions about her and her relation to Naruto, which the woman was doing a good job of smiling and politely answering the questions that the frantic girls bombarded her with. "If you are so interested, Kakashi, perhaps you should just go over there and ask her. That is what my students are doing," Asuma said with a grin as he blew some smoke out his nose from his cigarette. Kakashi looked at Naruto's exhausted form and kept seeing his previously heavily injured form he had seen on the Chunin exam floor. He slowly and quietly made his way up, followed by the remaining Jounin as he positioned himself behind the students. "What happened, Naruto?" he asked weakly as he stared at his exhausted student's form. Naruto looked up to his teacher by law standing behind, and towering over the majority of his friends by a good foot. Naruto frowned at the question and was about to respond that was until Mei decided to rub salt on his wounds. Naruto was in his battle with Gaara, carrying out the match as planned, and after he had eliminated the redhead sand by turning it into glass, he foolishly forgot about the armor of sand that covers the boy's body. If it wasn't for Naruto's innate healing ability that through sheer luck he has, he would be dead right now. It is a miracle that Naruto could stand long enough to get the match called in his favor. "Naruto, do you have anything to add to my analysis of your situation?" Her tone was cold and harsh, a great contrast between how she had acted mere moments ago. Although Naruto wasn't going to defend himself, she was likely worried about him. After all, she was right. If he was any other person, he would be dead right now. "What she said?" Naruto said dryly as he leaned forward and adjusted the gauntlet on his arm and looked down to the arena floor. Temari had just won her match by adding a significant amount of power behind a particular gust of wind that sent Shino barreling against the wall, and he chose to forfeit. The proctor announced that before the finals they would be taking a 10 to 15 minute break so the contestants, particularly Temari considering she just had a match, had the chance to recover. Kakashi continued to stare at Naruto, which was beginning to make the boy uneasy. The area around the group was becoming tenser by the second, and Naruto just decided to break the tension by turning to Sasuke. "I knew you were too afraid to fight me," he proclaimed with a cheeky grin that instantly melted the tension and had everyone around feeling amusement as Sasuke bristled at the comment. "No, Naruto, merely too afraid to be seen with you wearing your current outfit," Sasuke said with a weak grin. The action surprised several in the area, not sure what to make about the Uchiha's attitude. The comment sure was an insult, but the banter between the two teammates appeared to be all in good fun. "Meh, I didn't want to pick something out that would take me hours to put on and make me arrive late to the exams. Nice strap on," Naruto said dismissively with a wave of his hand as he gestured to the boys' belts on his arm at the end of his statement. This naturally caused a few of the more mature members of the group such as Kurenai, Osama, and Shikamaru to give a snort of amusement. Everyone else, flushing in embarrassment, or not, well, they had something to say about it. "Don't talk to Sasuke-kun like that." "Good one, Naruto." "Naruto baka, that wasn't nice." "Remember what I told you about speaking your mind, Naruto," was the voice that went above all of the other comments, and it came from the enigmatic Mizukage. Naruto pursed his lips and leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest, and stayed silent. Kakashi gave a low whistle with an eye smile and in an attempt to brighten the situation said, "That is impressive. I wish I knew how to do that with Naruto." The Mizukage, to her credit, was able to give a weak smile and bite her tongue on the subject to not blatantly insult the man before her. She had a very low tolerance with poor teaching. Perhaps that was because of their quality over quantity mentality when it came to shinobi. However, that was 3 years of self-control. Naruto, on the other hand, well. "Perhaps if you bothered to give a damn about me, I would be more respectful towards you," Naruto said in a growl as he refused to look Kakashi in the eye from where he was sitting. And within an instant, and slightly cheerful mood Kakashi had created was gone and replaced with a sour one. The comment struck Kakashi hard like a kick in the balls, but before he could try and make a comeback or an excuse, Naruto said, "You told me you went off to train Sasuke because you were going to train him to fight Gaara. Fine, regardless of the bullshit surrounding the fact that Neji was just if not more of a dangerous opponent for me than Gaara was to Sasuke, I let it slide. However, here you are right in front of me acting like nothing is wrong, asking me questions as if you were asking me how the weather is? The fact of the matter is you abandoned me with no adequate help for this month, and in the end your initial excuse for training Sasuke to fight Gaara? Newsflash, Kakashi, I fought Gaara, not Sasuke. If I hadn't found May this month to train me this month, I would be dead, and frankly I should by all intents and purposes be dead now. So I really don't want to fucking talk to you right now." Everyone was silent save the Mizukage, whom had taken to humming while massaging the boy's currently weak abdomen. She had long since heard a couple rants from Naruto about the subject and knew that the boy was going to blow up sooner or later at his sensei. Something that she didn't mind happening. The more distant he becomes to the people in his village, the better for her in the long run. "You failed me, mister. Those who break the rules are trash, but those whom abandon their teammates are worse than that," Naruto said with a scowl as he got up and shoved past his friends while prying away Mei's hands from his stomach. He weaved through the Jounin senseis standing in front of them. He ran over to the rail before diving over it and flying straight down into the water in a dive. Little did anyone know, the words that were said to Kakashi truly did hit home for him because it wasn't the first time he had heard them. He remembered quite well several people in his life saying something along those lines. Yet the one that really stood out in his mind for this current situation? Rin. He went back to his memories of her with a sigh. However, he should consider himself lucky that he doesn't know the full story. A young brown-haired teen ran down corridor after corridor of a seemingly endless maze. There was next to no visibility in the dark underground tunnels. The walls were muddy and dry, but that didn't stop the various bugs that liked to make their nests in the walls. Rin, a young medic ninja, advanced far beyond her years. She was predicted to become as skilled as Tsunade by the age of 20 if she continued to excel at her current rate of growth. Her life had changed the moment the Kyuubi had come to Konoha. Rin was a shinobi that heavily believed in teamwork, and that was why it hurt so much knowing that her weakness was the reason one of her former teammates was dead. That day she learned that the life expectancy of a shinobi was not as long as many believed. This was only solidified by the fact that when she was 17 alongside her 15-year-old teammate Hatake Kakashi, the Kyuubi attacked. The attack had forever scarred the memories of many of the villagers. They would never forget about what was lost that day. Rin had not only lost a Hokage, she lost a teacher, and a father figure when Namake's Minato fell sealing the beast in his baby boy. A secret that was well kept, well except from a couple young women. Kushina wasn't native to Fire Country, and her well-known status as the Kyuubi container had made it significantly harder for her to make friends. Whether they were intimidated by the woman's own strength and personality, or the beast that resided in her gut, Rin did not know. So naturally when it came down to both Rin and Uchiha Mikoto to look out for the young boy, well, they did their best. That was until an assassination attempt was made on the boy by a shinobi mother. She had lost both of her parents, as well as husband and newborn child during the Kyuubi attack. It was hard not to aim your anger at the beast, or more precisely what contained the beast. While irrational, Rin knew that the thought had crossed her mind before after having lost both Minato and Kushina during the attack. The assassin had come in through the window of the former Namikaze household. Both Uchiha Mikoto and Rin were sitting in the living room drinking tea, having just put Naruto to bed. Rin took a deep breath as she thought back to that night. I was naive. Both Rin and Mikoto never thought once about one trying to assassinate the boy, at least not anyone from their own village. So when Mikoto had taken a kunai knife to the leg, giving the woman a nice scar before they could finish the assassin off, the damage had already been done. Yet the damage wasn't to the boy. Rin knew that in her heart that she would give up her arms and legs to have both Minato and Kushina back. The two of them had grown to be her family. So after the assassination attempt, and the Hokage forcing Rin to reassign because he felt the baby needed better protection, was a blow that she could never forget, not only to her pride, but to her honor. Sure, she had succeeded in protecting the child, but at what costs? Uchiha Fugaku, instantly after seeing his wife being injured, forced her to stay home from that point on and take care of Sasuke. Naruto was no longer going to be able to grow up in his own home, and was forced to grow up in the care of the orphanage in the middle of town. Rin knew from experience that the place wasn't the place to go for a happy childhood. She could only imagine what it would be like for the Kyuubi container. Yet there was little she could do. Konoha had laws, and these laws were put in place for a reason. One of these were the adoption laws put in place. In order to adopt, the potential parent must be of the minimum age of 18. In other words, they must be considered an adult by civilian standards. This was mainly put in place so some 12-year-old genin couldn't get the foolish idea to adopt an orphan child, and then later on both of them are found on the streets. However, Rin knew that Naruto wasn't just an everyday case. The person that would be intending to adopt Naruto would have to be able to defend themselves and him, well. This was something that she had already failed to do in the eyes of the Hokage. So, for now she was 0 for 2. So she decided to train a lot. Now Rin, before the Kyuubi attack, and before Naruto had came into her life, was merely the average shinobi, but more importantly she was the typical orphan. She wanted to do something in her life, and she wanted to fit in somewhere. She even remembered a time back when they still had Obito. She was hanging around Inazukatsu and painting her cheeks with purple squares. She joined the shinobi career for acknowledgement. She gave herself a task that was believed to be impossible to achieve, and set out to achieve it by the end of her lifetime. To become a medic greater than Tsunade of the Sannin. One thing was altered from her initial dream, and her dream of today, and it was very simple. Achieve her goal by the time Naruto turned 4. Was it impossible? Some would say most definitely. However, Rin was a firm believer that nothing was impossible with the right motivation. One merely needed someone to be motivated for, someone to live for. So she became absorbed. Not just in books, but in training. She had taken a temporary leave from her shinobi career to specifically train. Day in, day out, she was like a machine. Any mediocre social life she had formerly was destroyed and replaced with books ranging from anatomy to molecular structure, and even to books on evolution. People began to fear that the girl was going to be the second coming of Orochimaru with the rate she was going. Yet they let her slide as she repeatedly began curing and healing shinobi with conditions believed to be untreatable. From poisons to vicious lacerations, she could fix it. That was when the investigation started. She had been hearing whispers here and there about a mission assignment that was going to be assigned by the Hokage. Although most of the jounins in the village, including her despite her inactive status, were privileged with hearing the Hokage's mission. It was assaulting a base, but not just any base, Orochimaru's base. Many of the shinobi in the room were reluctant to even bother wanting to go, at least until the Hokage revealed the full scheme of things. She could still vividly remember what he said, and it made her blood boil. About a year ago, the Kyuubi attacked us, and as I am sure you know, we lost many lives that day, including the life of our beloved Yondaime Hokage, Namikaze Minato. Now I am telling you this with good conscience that you won't go blabbing your mouth the moment you leave this meeting room. However, we have reason to believe that the Kyuubi did not irrationally attack us, and in fact we believe that none other than Orochimaru, my former student, has. Needless to say, people burst out in murmurs after that comment. Yet the Hokage continued. I know this may come as quite a surprise, however, when Minato had taken to sealing the great beast, as he died he told me someone had initially taken control of the Kyuubi. However, he died before he was able to tell me who. Me and several members on the council believe that Orochimaru has more than likely developed a way to control the beast similar to the control he can exert over young Mitarashi Enko through her curse seal. Normally I would request that you take hostages under these circumstances, but I know my former student, and I know that he is far too strong to attempt to detain alive. So, this is strictly an assassination. Due to the risks of this mission, I will merely ask for volunteers and hope you will prove to me you have the will of fire and step up to the challenge I have proposed for you all. Rin was the first to volunteer for the team, which was followed by her teammate Hataki Kakashi. Whether it was because of revenge, or an old promise to always protect her that he had given to their former teammate, she did not know, but her long-time crush on her teammate told her to believe it was the later, seeing as how it was rather cute. But the mission that was assigned now takes us back to Rin's current situation. She ran down a dark tunnel, jumping up quickly to cut a support beam with a chakra scalpel, causing rocks to cave in where she was standing 6 seconds ago 100 yards away. She cut down a hallway, already having the place memorized in her head by heart, seeing as how she practiced for weeks at memorizing the tunnels. She kicked open a door in the hallway, quickly waving the chakra scalpel in front of her face in the dark room, which served to chop the striking cobra's head clean off. She shot out the smallest of Kenjutsus without the use of hand seals, lighting up the room and effectively telling her there are no more threats in the immediate vicinity. She closed the door quickly and flashed a few hand seals before raising up a waist-high heavy stone block out of the ground, blocking the door. She sat down against the block, pressing her hand to her ear, and said into a headset, "This is Rin, and there is a horde of subjects chasing me down corridor X5. I have held myself up in room and reinforced the door, but I am in need of immediate assistance." And this was the first time she tasted it, and she suddenly realized why the oh-so-noble Orochimaru had fallen. Betrayal. Coming re, she heard Kakashi yell over the intercom, or at least tried to, before a vicious crack came from his end of the microphone. "Belay that, Rin, you are going to need to find your own way out of the compound. We will be waiting at Red Heaven for approximately 1 hour before we will be returning to the village. This mission is a failure," came the voice of a shinobi over the microphone whom was heavily suspected with being associated with Danzo's root program. "What?" she yelled. She could only hear static signaling that the radio connection between the two had since been cut off. The sound of hammering and scratching on the door behind her now was the only thing that filled her ears. Yes, she understood completely why Orochimaru had left Konoha. He wasn't the betrayer, he was the betrayed. A hulking purple-skinned dog with 2 humanoid arms growing out of its back burst through a wooden door and stood on top of the block of stone Rin had raised. Rin sighed and released the chakra scalpel. She let them take her. Kakashi was brought back to reality through the sound of collected gasp amongst the stadium and cheering. Naruto stood on the stadium wall, a good 30 feet above the water, grasped onto Temari. Nothing would be strange there if that was all of the information. The detail that made everyone gasp and cheer was Naruto filling up a water prison jutsu with water out of the air molecules. Kakashi couldn't help but smile as Naruto was declared victor of the match. Who would have thought? The dead last of this year dominates the Chunin exam finals. Kakashi held back a grin that formed. While he didn't train the boy, and Naruto was right in his comment about him, he couldn't help but feel a swell of pride as he saw the boy flash a cheeky grin before pumping his fist into the air. This was initially a chapter break. Naruto could barely contain his grin as he stood on the arena man-made lake. It was supposedly tradition for all of the Kages to come down and personally congratulate the winner of the tournament, and more often than not present the winner with the title of Chunin. So when Naruto saw the 3 Kages present at the exam right in front of them, 2 with noticeable smiles on their faces while the Kazekage's face remained hidden by a black flap in front of his mouth, it slightly annoyed Naruto that the Kazekage appeared to be more focused on looking up into the stands and presumably giving nods of acknowledgement to people that were cheering loudly in the crowd. Mei walked up to Naruto first and pulled him into a warm hug before kissing him on the cheek and whispering, "I told you that you could do this, Naruto." Mei honestly felt herself get a bit teary-eyed at the boy before her whom she had come to know over the past month. It was an action that she couldn't really even rationalize herself. She told herself in the beginning that she would not get in any way, shape, or form actually emotionally attached to the boy. Yet over the past month of constant contact with the boy, she had to admit that the boy had seemingly wormed his way into her heart. Perhaps she wasn't as great of a manipulator as she thought, still she was damn good. "You owe me," Naruto said with a cheeky grin, which Mei only nodded and proceeded to get Naruto a kiss on his other cheek before stepping back. She knew while this certainly had an effect on Naruto, it had one on the rest of the stadium, just as she intended. Naruto in the meantime was blushing up a storm. He had grown to get quite a crush on Mei over the past month, but he crushed any ideas he was getting with the fact that he should be more focused on training. Yet now with everything that has happened, whether it be between his current goal being achieved, the bet he made with Mei earlier, and him receiving a kiss from not only a beautiful woman, but the Mizukage in front of his entire village. Well, needless to say, Naruto's face was even redder than blood if it was even possible. The Hokage had spared Naruto any more embarrassment by coming up to Naruto next, and giving the boy a short hug while sending a narrowed-eyed stare to the Mizukage before presenting the boy with a scroll. Presumably the scroll contained various papers for promotion as well as a Chunin vest. Naruto gave a bow as he accepted the scroll before stepping before the Kazekage with his hand outstretched. The Kazekage gave a small snort before saying, "I'm impressed you were able to defeat 2 of my children," he said calmly. At the statement, Naruto got wide eyes. He may have heard it in passing, but there was no way he remembered that Gaara and Temari were both the Kazekage's children. Naruto suddenly felt the slightest bit nervous shaking the man's hand. The man grasped Naruto's hand with pale frail fingers that had a distinct chill to them despite the fact that it was quite a hot day, a feat that unnerved Naruto slightly. "However, I have a request, Uzumaki," he said calmly as he withdrew his hand from Naruto's. "I came to this tournament to witness the last Uchiha of Konoha do battle. Would you be up for fighting the boy now, despite your many battles today already? I believe you will if the will of fire courses through your veins like your Hokage likes to proclaim." This request had instantly drawn the eyes of the other 2 Kages on the field, and even put Sarutobi on the defensive. He had an inkling as to just who was under that Kazekage outfit. His muscles tensed, he was more than ready to start a battle with the man on the Chunin exam floor if need be. Naruto, despite being tired, couldn't help but smirk slightly. Sure, it was a bit disappointing for the Kazekage to blatantly admit to his face that he didn't care that much about Naruto's battles. However, the prospect of kicking Sasuke's ass in front of a whole bunch of people? Well, that was just something Naruto wasn't willing to pass up. After all, he did want to be Hokage. He needed to show everyone he had the will of fire someday, right? "Alright, as long as Sasuke is fine with getting his ass kicked," Naruto said calmly, resisting the urge to taunt his teammate from the arena floor already. The action made both the Mizukage and Hokage resist the urge to choke the boy. There was one thing with acting out in front of friends, and another to act out in front of a Kage. "Naruto," the Hokage began before the Mizukage quickly cut in. "I believe that I will have to work with you on manners, Naruto," she said calmly with a hint of force in her voice. The Hokage gave the woman a pointed look when she stated this, and after everything that had happened that day, he had to cut in. "Excuse me, Mizukage, but I believe I know how to address my shinobi. I would like to remind you just where you happen to be." There was a lingering threat in the old Hokage's statement, and everyone picked up on it. True, she may be a powerful ninja for being a Mizukage. However, she was by no means take on an entire village by herself with 2 bodyguards powerful. Although it did surprise Sarutobi, and suddenly leave a bad taste in his mouth, as he realized how grave the situation was when Naruto spoke up. "Hey, don't talk to Mei-chan like that, old man. She has been nothing but nice to me, and helped me this entire month for this exam. She is more of a sensei and friend to me than anyone in Konoha. She has just been trying to get me to behave better, that's all," he finished weakly at the end. That statement was not something Mei was expecting the boy to yell, to his Hokage no less. She could only wonder if this was a good thing or a bad thing, because she knew the Hokage must not be taking this blatant in-your-face revelation too well. Sarutobi took a deep breath and looked over to Naruto. "Be that as it may, Naruto, remember that I am still in charge of you as a shinobi, and the Mizukage knows she overstepped her boundaries when she was essentially giving you an order and training you without my permission." Before anyone could reply to his statement, he closed the subject by opening another. "Anyways, someone please go gather Uchiha Sasuke, and ask if he wishes to fight." He made the statement to no one in particular around, but sure enough, up in the stands not a few moments later, there was a masked shinobi standing beside Sasuke and Kakashi. Naruto had a sour expression as he stared at the man who he had always considered to be like a grandfather to him. How could he just blatantly be rude to someone he cared about like that? He knows how hard it is for him to make friends with people. What if him being rude to Mei-sensei caused her to leave? Those were the thoughts flowing through Naruto's mind, at least. Soon enough, Kakashi and Sasuke were both on the arena floor standing next to the proctor who had also been called back down to the arena floor. The Kazekage seemed to get a grin across his face, or at least that was what Naruto assumed. You never really could tell with the people that would cover half of their face. He also made some odd gesture to the group before leaving. He tilted his hat downward before rolling 4 of his fingers along the side of it. It wasn't completely obvious seeing as how it didn't attract the attention of Kakashi, whom was currently saying a few hushed words to Sasuke. Yet it did catch the attention of the old man, whose eyes were practically glued on the Kazekage's retreating form. Mei also was seemingly on edge as she began to discreetly take several glances at different sections of the stadium stands. Needless to say, it unnerved Naruto. But the proctor, questioning both him and Sasuke about if they were ready, quickly took his mind off the Kazekage and put it directly on a plan he had cooked up with Mei for if he had to fight Sasuke in the exams. The main problem Naruto could see with this plan was, with just as much training as he had done over the month, it appeared Sasuke had done just as much. The prospect of outdated battle strategy working on a boy that could virtually see everything was slim to none. Then again, Neji could see everything. "Hajime," The Kazekage passed by a single Konoha Umbu on his way up the stairs returning to the Kage box. He wasn't being followed by the two other Kages yet, and thus was why he felt no danger in stating what he wanted. Orochimaru-sama, I saw the SIG. I want that seal released now, he said as he calmly walked past the Umbu whom had seemingly frozen in place at the statement. But that would kill us all. Why did Sasuke's match have to be the signal for the invasion to start? The Umbu quickly thought to himself as he spun around quickly to look at the retreating form of his true leader before vanishing himself.